She had survived 5 years alone. No money, no father's name on her birth certificate, just a small daughter and bills never paid on time. Then one snowy night, he sat there, right in the middle of the restaurant where she worked, in a tailored suit with a scar on his eyebrow, and the look of someone who had killed to survive. Roman Vescari, the man who had vanished from her life 5 years earlier without a word. And when their eyes met, Celine Arden understood that the worst of her life had just begun. If you're reading this story, please like and comment the city you're reading in so I know how far my story has progressed. And don't go anywhere, because this is just the beginning. The snow came down wrong that night. Not the clean postcard kind that softened the city and made tourists stop to take photographs. This was the other kind. The kind Manhattan specialized in, dirty and wind-driven, half sleet, half exhaust, coating everything in a gray film that turned the sidewalks into slick black mirrors. Celine Arden had been walking through it for 6 blocks because the bus had been running 22 minutes late, and she couldn't afford to wait. She was already going to be 4 minutes behind the start of her shift. 4 minutes was enough for Marco, the floor manager at Belladonna House, to dock her a full half hour. She couldn't lose a half hour. Not this week. She pushed through the staff entrance on 53rd with her coat soaked through at the shoulders, and her fingers so stiff she could barely work the buttons of her locker. Around her, the other waitresses moved in various states of preparation, lipstick applied in locker mirrors, hair pinned up with practiced speed, black aprons tied and retied. The air smelled like garlic butter and expensive perfume leaking in from the dining floor, and underneath that, the industrial cleaner the kitchen staff used on the tile floors every morning. "You're late," said a voice behind her. "I'm 4 minutes late," Celine said without turning around. "And the bus was 22 minutes late, so mathematically speaking, I'm ahead." Marco didn't laugh. He never laughed. He stood in the doorway holding his tablet like it was a weapon and looked at her the way men like him always looked at women like her, like she was a variable in a spreadsheet that kept producing the wrong number. "Table 9 is a private booking. 6 guests. I need you on it. I have tables 3 through 7 already assigned. Derek can cover 3 through 6. I need someone experienced on 9. Celine finally turned to look at him. "Why?" "Because the man who booked it tipped $4,000 the last time he came in, and I want to make sure he does it again." Marco's expression didn't change. "Change your lipstick. The coral doesn't work under the dining room lights. Use the red." He left before she could respond. She stared at her own reflection in the locker mirror for a moment. 23 years old, and she looked it, but barely, and only in the right light. The wrong light, which was most lights, showed the exhaustion she'd been carrying for the better part of 4 years, the shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer fully erased, the tension she kept permanently stored in the hinges of her jaw from grinding her teeth while she slept, which was something she'd been doing since Ivy was born and hadn't stopped. Ivy. She'd left her daughter with Mrs. Paulson from 4B, the retired woman who watched her on weeknights for $40 cash, and sometimes forgot to give Ivy her evening cup of warm milk before bed. The apartment heat had been cutting out intermittently for 2 weeks, and Celine had left an extra blanket on Ivy's cot and told her she was the bravest girl in New York, and Ivy had looked up at her with Roman's eyes, those impossible dark eyes, and said, "I know, Mama," with the absolute conviction of a 4-year-old who had never had cause to doubt it. Celine changed her lipstick to red. The dining room at Belladonna House operated on a specific kind of theater. The lighting was warm and amber and strategic, designed to make everyone inside look like a slightly better version of themselves. The tables were set with linen that got changed between each seating and crystal glasses that the bussers polished individually before service. The wine list ran to 48 pages. The cheapest bottle was $300. The clientele came for the food, certainly. The chef had 2 Michelin stars and a waiting list 8 months deep. But they mostly came because being seen at Belladonna meant something in this city, and there were people in this city for whom being seen was the entire architecture of their existence. Celine had been working here for 14 months. She was good at the job, good enough that she'd learned to read the room, who needed more attention, who needed to be left alone, who was on a date they weren't supposed to be on. She'd learned to move through the space like she was invisible when it suited the guests and visible when it suited the bill. She picked up the private booking card from the host stand as she passed. Table 9. Reserved under V Group Holdings, LLC. 6 covers, 8 p.m. arrival. Dietary notes, none. Special requests, privacy screen positioned to block direct sightline from the bar. She slipped the card back and crossed the dining room toward the service station closest to table 9, which occupied a raised alcove along the east wall, separated from the main floor by a low partition of dark wood and frosted glass. The table itself was already set. The privacy screen had been positioned. 2 of the 6 chairs were already occupied by men she didn't recognize, both large, both wearing suits that didn't quite disguise the way they were built, both with the alert and stillness of people who were paid to watch doorways. The other 4 chairs were empty. She began reviewing the table setup, adjusting the placement of a wine glass by a centimeter, checking the candle. She had her back to the entrance of the alcove when she heard the shift in the room. Not loud, not obvious, just a subtle change in the frequency of ambient sound. The way a room changes when someone walks into it who takes up more space than their body technically occupies. She turned around, and the world lurched sideways. He was standing at the entrance of the alcove, one hand resting loosely at his side, a phone in the other. He was flanked by 2 more men, mirror images of the 2 already seated, and he was wearing a suit so dark it was nearly black, charcoal gray at certain angles. The jacket cut close across shoulders that had gotten broader since she'd last seen them. His hair was the same, nearly black, slightly too long at the collar, but everything else had hardened, the jaw, the eyes. The particular quality of stillness he possessed, which had always been there but which used to feel like restraint and now felt like something entirely different. The scar was new. A clean line bisecting his left eyebrow, pale against his skin. Roman Vescari. For 3 full seconds, Celine couldn't move. His eyes found her the way his eyes had always found her. Immediately, completely, with the specific focus of someone who had always been able to pick her out of any room. He stopped walking. The 2 men flanking him continued forward by half a step before registering that he'd stopped and adjusting without a word, spreading slightly, their attention moving outward to scan the broader dining room with the practiced efficiency of men who did this professionally. Roman looked at her. She looked at him. The candle on table 9 hissed faintly in some breath of air she couldn't locate. His expression didn't break. It didn't crack or crumble or flood with obvious emotion the way she might have scripted it if she'd had the luxury of scripting it. What it did was something more dangerous. It went very, very still in a way that was different from his baseline stillness. Like a man who has just discovered something he was not prepared to discover and is rapidly, silently calculating what it means. Mr. Vescari. It was Marco's voice, from somewhere behind her, bright and unctuous and entirely oblivious. Welcome back. We have everything prepared. Roman's eyes moved to Marco for precisely 2 seconds, then returned to Celine. Good, he said. His voice was the same. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected something different about it, some mark of the years, but it was the same low, unhurried timbre that she'd heard in her own head approximately 10,000 times since he'd disappeared. He moved to the table with the particular economy of someone who never wasted motion, took the chair that placed his back against the wall and his sightline on the entire room, and sat. Celine stood at the service station and breathed. She breathed carefully. She made sure her face was arranged correctly. She had been a waitress long enough to know how to compose a face, and she used every bit of that skill now, because the alternative was to do something catastrophic like walk out of the dining room, or worse, say the thing that was sitting at the front of her throat with both hands wrapped around its own collar, ready to be said. 5 years. You were gone for 5 years. She picked up her order pad. She walked to table 9. She stood at Roman's right-hand side, the standard position, and looked at a point approximately 2 inches above his shoulder. Good evening. My name is Celine, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start the table with still or sparkling water? The pause before he answered lasted 1 beat too long. Sparkling, he said. For the table. His voice was perfectly neutral. She was perfectly neutral. 2 people who had been wrecked by each other, performing neutrality in a candlelit alcove while a room full of wealthy strangers drank expensive wine and talked about things that didn't matter. She took the rest of the water order and walked back to the service station and stood with her hands braced against the counter and stared at the wall for 5 seconds. And then she got the sparkling water and brought it back and poured it and did her job. Because she had a daughter at home in an apartment where the heat didn't work properly, and she could not afford to have feelings about Roman Vescari tonight or any other night. The dinner service lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, Celine did her job with the precision of a surgeon. She took the full table's order. 6 men, none of whom introduced themselves, none of whom spoke above a murmur, all of whom had the particular watchfulness of people accustomed to threat, and delivered it and cleared it and refilled glasses and navigated the rhythms of a service she could perform in her sleep. She did not make unnecessary eye contact with Roman. She did not linger. She did not give herself permission to process anything until the shift was over. But she felt him watching her, not constantly. He wasn't that obvious, and he was clearly conducting business with the other men at the table. Conversations conducted in low voices that she caught fragments of without intending to. Numbers. Names of companies she didn't recognize. The word infrastructure used 3 times in ways that made it sound like a threat rather than a description. But between those conversations, in the spaces between, she felt the weight of his attention the way you feel a change in barometric pressure. Not with any single sense, but with all of them simultaneously, some animal alertness beneath rational thought. At 10:43, the last of his guests stood to leave. Roman remained seated. Celine was collecting dessert plates from the adjacent table when Marco appeared at her elbow. "Mr. Vescari would like to speak with you when you have a moment." She set the plates down with more care than they required. "I'm in the middle of closing." "Dara can finish closing." "Dara has her own—" "Celine." Marco's voice dropped. He wasn't harsh about it. He was, if anything, genuinely nervous. "The man tips $4,000. Please." She looked across the room at table 9. Roman was sitting with one arm resting on the table, looking directly at her with an expression that she couldn't read from this distance, which meant it was a controlled expression. Roman had always been able to control his face when he chose to. It was one of the things she'd learned about him at 18, sitting in the passenger seat of his second-hand truck in the parking lot of the gas station where he worked, that there were 2 Romans, the one who showed his face and the one who kept it hidden. She'd always assumed she could access both. She'd been wrong about that. She crossed the room. She stood on the opposite side of the table from him and kept her hands loose at her sides and said, "The kitchen is closing in 15 minutes. Is there something else I can bring you?" "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "Your manager just told you to take a break." "My manager?" She stopped, inhaled. "What do you want, Roman?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He gestured at the chair across from him with a slight movement of his hand, the kind of gesture that had become habitual, a man who was accustomed to things happening when he indicated they should happen. She sat. Not because he gestured, because she had things to say, and she would rather say them sitting down than standing over him like a supplicant. The candle between them was burning low. Outside the privacy screen, the restaurant was winding down, voices dropping, chairs being repositioned, the distant percussion of the kitchen beginning its closing routine. "You look the same," he said. "That's not what you want to talk about." "No." He looked at her. The controlled expression had shifted, fractionally, in some direction she couldn't name. "You're working as a waitress. I'm aware of what I'm doing. I wasn't judging it. You were noting it. Same thing, coming from you." Something moved behind his eyes. Not offense. Something more complicated than that. He picked up his glass and set it down without drinking from it. "I didn't know you were working here." "You didn't know anything about me. You made sure of that." The silence that followed had weight to it. Roman had always known how to deploy silence as a thing with mass. But this was different. This was a silence with an entire history packed into it, 5 years of accumulation, and both of them sitting on either side of it like it was a thing neither of them could move. "Why didn't you call me?" she said. It came out as a statement, not even a question really, more like reading a charge aloud. "Celine, I'm not asking you to explain it right now. I'm just stating it. You left. You didn't call. You didn't write. You didn't—" She stopped. pressed her teeth together, looked at the candle. You left me at 18 years old with nothing, and now you're sitting in a restaurant where I work and you want me to what exactly? Catch up? Roman was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and very careful. I came to explain. I don't need the explanation anymore. I built a life without it. I know. He looked at her. What kind of life? The question was quiet, too quiet. Something about the specificity of it, the weight he put on the word what, made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with something she had absolutely no intention of examining at 10:45 on a Tuesday night. She opened her mouth to say something oblique, something deflecting, something that would allow her to stand up and end this conversation and go back to her locker and get her coat and walk out into the dirty snow and take the bus home. What came out instead was, I have a daughter. She didn't plan it. It came out the way the truth sometimes comes out when you've been carrying it alone for too long, not as a decision, but as a release, a pressure valve opening without your permission. She watched it hit him. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. But something behind his eyes changed so completely and so fast that for a moment he looked like a different person, like the Roman she'd known at 20, stripped of every layer the years had deposited, every scar and suit and controlled stillness, down to something raw and unguarded and terrified. How old? He said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Celine held his gaze. 4. Her name is Ivy. The candle flickered. Roman sat very still for a long moment. His right hand, resting on the table, had closed slowly into a fist without him seeming to notice. He was looking at her with an expression she had no reference for, something between devastation and a terrible burgeoning hunger. Does she... He stopped, started again. Is she... yours? Celine said it flat and clean, no inflection, because she had refused to give that question any softness even in the privacy of her own head. Yes. The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Roman turned his head and looked at nothing for several seconds, and Celine watched his throat work as he swallowed. Outside, the restaurant was nearly quiet. The last guests had filtered out. The kitchen had gone still. Somewhere behind the bar, glass clinked softly against glass. When Roman turned back to look at her, the controlled expression was gone. What was left was something she had absolutely no defense against. I need you to hear me, he said. His voice had dropped to something she felt more than heard. I left because I had to, because what I was walking into would have gotten you killed if you were attached to me. I know that's not... He stopped. His jaw worked. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't... He looked at her with those eyes that Ivy had inherited without knowing who she'd gotten them from. I have a daughter. You have a daughter you didn't know about, Celine said carefully. That's different. 4 years. His voice was strange now. She's been alive for 4 years, and I didn't... No, Celine said. You didn't. The silence this time was different from the first one. The first had been heavy with accusation. This one was heavy with something more complex. Grief, maybe. Or the specific weight of time that cannot be reclaimed. Roman reached into his jacket pocket and placed a card on the table between them. A simple matte black card with a single phone number on it and no name. I'm not going to disappear again, he said. That's not a threat. I'm telling you so you can decide what to do with it. Celine looked at the card. She didn't pick it up. I don't know what you've become, she said. I don't know what any of this... She gestured, slightly, at the men who remained at a discreet distance near the entrance, at the armored quality of the entire situation, is. I know. The men outside, the way they move, the way this room changed when you walked in. She kept her voice level. I know what that is, Roman. I grew up in this city. I've seen it before. He didn't deny it. He didn't reach for any comfortable lie or reassuring half-truth. He looked at her steadily and said nothing, and somehow that was both worse and more honest than anything he could have said. Give me a week, he said. Not to explain everything, just to... Let me meet her, one time. If you decide after that it's not... He stopped. I'll respect whatever you decide. Celine sat with it for a moment. The card on the table, the low-burning candle. The man across from her who had broken her open at 18 and scattered the pieces across 5 years of a life she'd had to build herself, tile by tile, from the wreckage. She picked up the card. She held it between two fingers without looking at it. "I'll call you," she said. "When I'm ready. Not before." She stood up. She tucked the card into the front pocket of her apron. She picked up the empty sparkling water glass and the dessert fork he hadn't used and carried them back toward the service station without looking behind her. At the staff exit, when she finally had her coat on and her bag on her shoulder and her hand on the door, she made the mistake of looking back one more time. Roman was still at the table. He hadn't moved. He was looking at nothing, at the middle distance, at something she couldn't see and he probably couldn't see either, with an expression she recognized from years ago, from the parking lot of the gas station, from the nights they used to sit on the hood of his truck and watch the highway traffic. The expression he got when he was computing something that didn't have a clean answer. Except now it was the face of a man who had learned that he had a 4-year-old daughter 20 minutes ago, and whatever that computation looked like, she couldn't imagine it. She pushed through the door and walked out into the cold. The snow was still falling. She walked the 6 blocks to the bus stop and stood under the cracked plastic shelter and watched the street and did not cry, because crying was a luxury she'd phased out somewhere around Ivy's 2nd birthday, when it had become clear that there was no version of her life that had room for it. She was practical. She was surviving. She was fine. The bus was 19 minutes late. She stood in the snow with Roman's card in her apron pocket and felt it there like a coal. Not burning, not yet, but present. Warm. The specific heat of something that had been waiting a long time. Quote, she didn't sleep that night. She got home to find Mrs. Paulson asleep in the armchair with the television running, and Ivy curled in her cot under 2 blankets with her dark hair fanned out across the pillow and her small mouth slightly open, and Celine stood in the doorway of her daughter's room for 2 full minutes just looking at her. The shapes of her face. The curl of her fingers around the stuffed rabbit Celine had found at a street sale 2 summers ago. The way she breathed, slow and deep and entirely trustful. The way only children who have never had reason to doubt their safety breathe. She had Roman's eyes, had always had them. Celine had cataloged this fact early, had found ways to look at it sideways instead of directly, the way you learn not to look directly at things that were too bright or too painful. The eyes were his. The stubbornness was his. The way she sometimes went completely still and watchful, like something was happening just below the surface. That was his, too. Celine paid Mrs. Paulson and locked the door and sat at the kitchen table with the card in front of her. She didn't call. She wasn't going to call at midnight. She had told him she'd call when she was ready, and she needed to figure out what ready meant. She looked at the bills stacked at one end of the table. The electric bill. Past due, $63. The credit card minimum, barely making it every month. The daycare invoice. The copay after assistance, which still added up to something that made her math work only if she was extremely careful and nothing broke. Nothing ever stayed unbroken. She folded the card and put it in the kitchen drawer under the takeout menus and went to bed. The next morning, Ivy woke her at 6:15 by placing both her small hands on Celine's face, as she always did, and saying, "Mama, Mama, it's morning," with the same urgency she brought to all announcements, as though morning were an event that required notification. "I know, baby," Celine said, pulling her in. "I know." Ivy smelled like sleep and the detergent Celine used on her pajamas. She squirmed and chattered and demanded the particular breakfast configuration she'd been committed to for the past 2 weeks. Scrambled eggs with no runny parts and apple slices in a specific arrangement. And Celine made it while standing at the stove in her socks and yesterday's exhaustion and thought about the card in the kitchen drawer. She didn't tell Ivy. She had nothing to tell Ivy. There was nothing to tell yet. She dropped her at the daycare on 40th, which was run by a woman named Dottie, with an iron schedule and zero tolerance for tardiness from either children or parents. And then she took the subway to the second job, the morning one, the coffee counter at the hotel on 6th, where she worked 4 mornings a week before her dinner shifts at Belladonna. At 11:17 a.m., standing at the coffee counter between the breakfast rush and the early lunch trickle, she took out her phone. She stared at it. She typed the number from the card. She typed, This is Celine. Don't call me. I'll let you know when to call. She sent it and put the phone face down on the counter and made 3 lattes and a drip coffee and didn't look at the phone for 20 minutes. When she finally looked, there was one response. Understood. That was it. Nothing else. No punctuation she could misread, no subtext she could overanalyze. Understood. She should have found it cold. She told herself it was cold, but she knew him well enough, or had known him well enough, to read the compression in it, the restraint of a person holding back an enormous amount in 2 syllables. She put the phone in her apron pocket and went back to work. Totem. He was outside when she finished the dinner shift the following Thursday. She walked out the staff door and the black SUV was parked at the curb. Not aggressively, not blocking anything, just there. One of his men was visible near the front of the vehicle, and the rear window was slightly lowered, and that was enough. She stopped on the sidewalk and looked at it, and the window rolled the rest of the way down. Roman didn't say anything. He just looked at her through the open window. Celine crossed the wet sidewalk and stood at the car window and looked at him. He was in a different suit. He looked like he'd slept slightly less than she had, which she found unexpectedly satisfying. I said I'd call you, she said. You haven't called. It's been 4 days. I know how many days it's been. She looked at him for a moment. You waited outside my job. I'm not following you. I came to ask if... He stopped. His jaw moved slightly. I want to see her. I understand it's too soon. I understand you need time. But I've been sitting with this for 4 days, and I need you to know that I'm not going to disappear, and I need you to believe that before you make decisions about whether to... Roman. She said his name, and the sentence stopped. She looked at him. What are you now? Don't tell me you run companies. Don't tell me about V Group Holdings. Tell me what you actually are. The silence was brief but total. Dangerous, he said. Flat. Simple. Not as a boast, more as a warning or an honesty. I'm dangerous, and I have enemies, and those are things you need to know going in. Going into what exactly? To whatever this is. Whatever we have to figure out. His eyes held hers. She's mine, Celine. I know I haven't earned anything. I know I have no right to any part of this. But she exists, and I missed 4 years, and I can't unknow that. The street noise filled the space between them. A cab horn somewhere. The distant percussion of the city's permanent soundtrack. Celine thought about Ivy's face that morning. The way she'd announced the morning like an event. The eyes she'd gotten from somewhere Celine had tried not to think about for 4 years. Sunday, she said. There's a park 3 blocks from my apartment. We'll be there at 10. You come alone. No men, no cars. Just you. Something shifted in his expression. Alone? If you can't be alone somewhere for an hour, then you're too far into whatever this is for any of this to be a good idea. He held her gaze for a long moment. Sunday, he said. 10 a.m. Celine stepped back from the car. The window started to roll up. She stopped it with one hand on the frame. Not forcefully, just enough to pause it. Roman, he looked at her. If you do anything that scares her, anything even accidentally, this ends. You understand me? His expression, for a moment, was the one she recognized from underneath all the others. The unguarded one. The one that looked like the boy she'd loved in a gas station parking lot under neon lights when the world had been smaller, and neither of them had known what was coming. I understand, he said. She let the window go. She walked the 6 blocks home in the snow and did not let herself think about what Sunday would look like until she was inside with the door locked. But in her chest, something she had been keeping sealed for 4 years had cracked open just slightly along its seam, and no matter how she braced against it, she could feel the cold air getting in. Sunday came fast. She dressed Ivy in her warmest coat, the red one with the hood, slightly too big because Celine always bought a size ahead to extend the life of the purchase, and a knit hat with a bear face on it that Ivy was very particular about, and little waterproof boots because there was still snow in the park, and Ivy would find every wet patch if given the opportunity. Where are we going? Ivy asked, as she always did, already pulling on her boots with the specific focused determination she brought to all tasks. The park by the swing with the red seat, remember? The good swing. The good swing, yeah. Can I have hot chocolate after? If you eat your breakfast first. I ate breakfast. You ate 3 bites of egg and then announced you were done. Ivy considered this with the philosophical seriousness of a 4-year-old weighing the technicalities of a contract. It was enough bites. It was not enough bites. They negotiated the egg situation for 5 minutes, eventually arriving at 4 bites as a compromise, which Ivy consumed with great performance and seriousness, and then they were out the door and down the stairs and into the cold, bright morning. The park was quiet at 10 a.m., dog walkers, a few joggers, a grandmother pushing a stroller along the path that ran between the frozen fountain and the row of snow-covered benches. The swings were empty except for one occupied by a child younger than Ivy in a yellow coat being pushed by a person who looked approximately as tired as Celine felt. Roman was already there. He was standing on the edge of the path near the swings, alone, exactly as she'd asked, his hands in the pockets of a dark coat that was clearly expensive, but worn like someone who wasn't thinking about it. He was watching the park with the same outward-focused attention his men always had, except there was something underneath it this time, a tension in the set of his shoulders that wasn't threat assessment, wasn't security. It was fear. Celine recognized it because she knew what fear looked like on Roman. It looked like stillness. Ivy spotted the swings and pulled at her hand. Swing, Mama. The good swing. In a minute. Celine walked toward him. Ivy came along by necessity, trotting to keep pace, looking around at the park with the comprehensive attention she brought to any new environment. Roman turned when he heard their footsteps on the path. He looked at Celine first, a brief, acknowledging look. Then his eyes moved to Ivy. And Celine watched the thing happen that she had known was going to happen and had still not fully prepared herself for. The moment a man looked at his own child for the first time and knew in his body before his mind that this was his. Ivy looked back up at him with absolutely no self-consciousness whatsoever, the way 4-year-olds look at strangers, with complete and evaluating frankness. "Hi," she said. Roman crouched. He didn't hesitate about it, didn't make it a considered gesture. He just went down to her level with the naturalness of someone following an instinct until he was eye to eye with her in the snow. "Hi," he said. His voice came out rough at the edges. "I'm Ivy," she said. "No." He glanced at Celine briefly. "I heard." "Who are you?" Ivy asked. Roman's throat worked. Celine held her breath. "I'm someone who knew your mom," he said. "A long time ago. My name is Roman." Ivy repeated it experimentally. "Roman." "Like the Romans?" "Like the Romans," he confirmed, and something crossed his face, the ghost of something that in another life would have been amusement. "We learned about them," Ivy said, very seriously. "They had soldiers." "They did." "Did you have soldiers?" The pause before his answer lasted precisely long enough to mean everything. "Something like that," Roman said. Ivy accepted this with the logic of a child whose world is still largely made of stories, and then she looked at the swings. "I'm going on the good swing now," she announced. "You can watch." She broke away from Celine's hand and marched toward the swings with purpose, the bare face on her hat nodding with each step. Roman stayed crouched in the snow for a moment, watching her go. When he straightened and turned to look at Celine, his face had the expression she'd been afraid of, the unguarded one, the one that had no armor. "Don't," Celine said. Her voice came out rough. "Just watch her for now." He nodded. He turned toward the swings. They stood side by side in the cold and watched Ivy claim the good swing and begin pumping her legs with absolute dedication, the red coat and the bare hat rising and falling against the pale winter sky. And for one moment, standing in the snow-covered park with Roman beside her and Ivy in the air ahead of them, Celine felt the specific vertigo of 2 timelines colliding, the one where he'd left and the one where she'd imagined, in her weakest moments, that he hadn't. She pressed her teeth together and looked at the sky and stayed standing. The swing rose. Ivy laughed. And in Celine's chest, the sealed thing cracked a little further open, leaking light she wasn't ready for. The park visit lasted 47 minutes. Celine timed it not because she was being clinical about it, but because she needed something to track, some external measurement to hold on to while everything inside her was performing its own private unraveling. 47 minutes of Ivy on the swing, then off the swing, then narrating the entire history of a pigeon she'd decided was interesting, then demanding to know why the fountain was frozen and whether the fish inside were cold and whether fish got cold the same way people did. Roman answered every question, not with the exaggerated brightness of an adult performing enthusiasm for a child, but straight, seriously, like Ivy's questions deserved actual consideration, which they did, because Ivy was not a child who asked questions she didn't mean. Celine stood slightly apart and watched and said very little. When it was over, when Ivy had exhausted the swing and the pigeon and the fountain and was beginning to circle back toward the hot chocolate negotiation, Celine touched her daughter's shoulder and said they were leaving. Ivy looked at Roman. "Will you come next time?" Roman glanced at Celine. Celine kept her face neutral. "We'll see," he said, which was a better answer than she'd braced for. He could have promised. Men like him often promise things to children because children believe promises without analyzing the fine print, and the short-term result was so immediately rewarding that the long-term cost was easy to defer. He didn't promise. He said, "We'll see," which put the decision where it belonged. She noted that, filed it somewhere. They walked out of the park and parted at the gate. Celine and Ivy heading left toward the apartment. Roman heading to wherever Roman went on Sunday mornings with no security and no armor, which she suspected was nowhere he was comfortable. "I like him," Ivy announced as soon as he was out of earshot. "I know," Celine said. "He listened to the pigeon story." "Most people do." "No, they don't." Ivy was unequivocal about this. "Dottie always looks away." Celine didn't have an answer for that. She held Ivy's hand and walked and tried not to think about the way Roman had looked when Ivy had said goodbye, the way he'd stood very still and watched them walk away, hands back in his pockets, until she'd made herself not look back. She made the hot chocolate when they got home. She let Ivy watch 2 episodes of the cartoon she was currently devoted to. She folded the laundry and paid the electric bill online, the $63, which left her checking account at a number she looked at once and then closed the app. At 7:15, after Ivy was in bed, her phone buzzed. "Thank you for Sunday." She sat with the text for a long minute, then typed back, "She liked you. Don't make her regret it." His response came immediately, "I won't." She plugged her phone in and went to bed and lay on her back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about nothing in particular and everything simultaneously, which was the specific kind of sleeplessness that had no solution. He called on Tuesday. She'd said to text, but it was a call, and she answered it because Ivy was at daycare and she was between the morning shift and an errand, and she had approximately 30 seconds of bandwidth before the next obligation arrived. "I said text," she said, instead of hello. "I know." A pause. "I wanted to hear your voice." "Roman, I need to talk to you about something and I couldn't do it by text." She stopped on the sidewalk, stepped out of the foot traffic, and put her back against a building. "What?" "I want to help." The directness of it was almost jarring. No preamble, no softening. "With Ivy, with the money situation. I know what the inside of your apartment looks like, Celine. I came to pick you up twice and I saw the bills on the counter." "You looked at my bills." "They were on the counter. I wasn't searching through your things." "You were in my apartment for 30 seconds. I noticed things quickly," he said, and there was no apology in it, which was both irritating and consistent. "The heat's been going out. You've got a daycare invoice on the fridge. Your fridge magnets are holding up things you can't afford, and you're doing it alone and you don't have to." Her jaw was tight. "I've been doing it alone for 4 years. I know. Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like it means something to you now. Like you get to have feelings about 4 years of something you chose to absent yourself from." The silence on the line had a different texture than the silences in person, longer, more exposed. She could hear his breathing, slow, controlled, the way he breathed when he was choosing his words very carefully. "I'm not going to fight with you about what I deserve to feel," he said finally. "I'm asking to help. That's all. Whatever arrangements need to be made, whatever helps Ivy specifically, I want to do that." You want to write a check? If that's what it takes, yes. I'm not taking your money. I didn't say for you, I said for Ivy. She pressed 2 fingers against her forehead and looked at the sidewalk. A man walked past eating something from a paper bag, and the smell of it hit her. Fried dough, warm sugar, and for a moment her stomach twisted with something that wasn't hunger. We'll talk about it, she said. Not now. Later. Okay. And Roman? She waited. Don't call again. Text. If I want to have a conversation, I'll start it. Another pause, then, okay. She hung up and stood on the sidewalk in the cold and breathed for a moment. Then she went and did her errand and went back to work and didn't look at her phone for 2 hours, which was a form of discipline she was finding increasingly expensive to maintain. But the problem with Roman reappearing was that he didn't do it halfway. She should have anticipated this. She had watched him at Belladonna House, had watched how he occupied a room, how the men around him organized themselves without being told, how his presence changed the acoustic quality of a space. Roman didn't do anything partially. He had never been a partial person. At 20, the things he felt completely, and the things he decided without revision. It had been one of the things that drew her to him at 18. That absolute quality, the sense of a person fully committed to whatever direction he was pointed. She simply hadn't understood what direction he was pointed in. By the second week, there was a car, not in a dramatic way, not a fleet of black SUVs idling outside her building. Just a message from him Tuesday morning. I arranged a car for you and Ivy in the mornings for the daycare run. Driver's name is Ellis. He'll be there at 7:45. You don't have to use it. She stared at the message for a long time. She used it that morning because it was below freezing, and Ivy had a cold that hadn't fully cleared, and the bus had been late 3 times that week. Ellis turned out to be a compact, quiet man in his late 50s who handed Ivy a small paper bag with 2 crackers in it when she got in the car. Thought she might want a snack, he said, and that was approximately the extent of their conversation. She told herself it was temporary, just until the weather broke. By the end of the second week, she had used it every morning and twice in the evenings. She called Roman on Friday. The car, she said. What about it? It's too much. It's a car, Celine. It takes you to daycare. She stopped, pushed the frustration down to where it could be examined rather than detonated. Every time you do something without asking, it changes the shape of my life without my permission. Do you understand that? A pause. Yes. Do you understand why that's a problem? Yes. His voice was controlled. I wanted to help and I moved faster than I should have. I'll ask before I do things. Not just ask, wait for me to say yes. Okay. And Ellis is staying, Ivy said from the other room, loud enough to be audible. Celine closed her eyes. She wasn't supposed to hear that. I know. She could hear the almost something in his voice. Not quite amusement, but the shape of it. This isn't funny. I know. He paused. Can I take the 2 of you to dinner? I'll ask properly. Will you have dinner with me? That's not asking properly. That's, Celine, will you have dinner with me and Ivy Saturday, somewhere normal? I'll pick the place and I'll text it to you first so you can decide. No men, no cars. We'll take a cab. She sat with it. Text me the place, she said. I'll decide. The place was a Ukrainian diner on the east side that Celine had never been to. Booths with red vinyl, laminated menus, the kind of overhead lighting that didn't flatter anyone and therefore flattered everyone equally. She approved of it precisely because it was nothing like Belladonna House. No ambient theater, no strategic warmth, just a diner. Roman was already there when they arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a laminated menu and a cup of black coffee, wearing a dark gray sweater and no suit jacket. And Celine registered the difference it made to see him without the armor of the suit before she could decide not to register it. Ivy climbed into the booth immediately and announced she wanted pancakes, which were not on the dinner menu, but the waitress, a woman in her 50s named B, according to her name tag, who had clearly been doing this long enough to be impervious to all human variation, went to the kitchen and came back to say that pancakes could be arranged. I like this place, Ivy said, with the certainty of a connoisseur. Good, Roman said. Do you come here a lot? First time, he said. Ivy accepted this and turned her attention to the little cup of crayons Bee had produced from somewhere and began to draw on the paper placemat with the focused intensity she brought to all creative projects. Roman watched her. Celine watched Roman watch her and pressed her thumbnail into her palm under the table. They ordered food. Roman ate a bowl of borscht and half a plate of vareniki and didn't make any commentary about the quality of either. Celine had the chicken and tried to eat it without appearing to be ravenous, which she was, because she'd worked a double the day before and had eaten a granola bar and a handful of crackers. At some point during the meal, after the food came and Ivy had been fed and was occupied with the drawing, Roman set down his fork and looked at her. I want to talk about something and I need you not to react before I finish. Celine set down her own fork. When someone says that, the thing they're about to say always justifies the reaction. Probably. He held her gaze. I want to put Ivy in a better daycare. She's in a fine daycare. Dottie's Fine Beginnings has a structural violation on the city's inspection record from last year. The heat in the back room where she naps doesn't work. And 3 weeks ago there was an incident where a child left the building unescorted for 4 minutes before staff noticed. The quiet at the table was the kind that had mass. How do you know that? Celine said. Her voice was level, which cost her. Because I looked into it. Roman's voice didn't waver. I looked into it because she's my daughter and I wanted to know where she spends 11 hours a week. You investigated her daycare? Yes. Without telling me. Yes. Roman. She leaned forward slightly, kept her voice below the ambient noise of the diner. You can't do that. That is not... You do not get to investigate my choices as a parent without telling me. You have been in her life for 2 weeks. I've been her father for 4 years, he said. I'm just the only one who didn't know it. The sentence hit with a precision she hadn't been braced for. Not cruel. He wasn't being cruel. Just honest, in the specific way that honesty sometimes functioned as a blade. She sat with it for a moment. You don't get to use that, she said quietly. You don't get to flip the accountability the minute it becomes inconvenient for you. I'm not flipping it. His jaw was tight. I'm saying that regardless of how we got here, the situation we're in now is that she is mine and I want her somewhere safe. I'll pay for it. You pick the facility. I won't go near it without your permission. He stopped. Exhaled. I need her to be somewhere with working heat. Celine looked at Ivy, who was drawing what appeared to be a horse, but might have been a very ambitious dog, entirely absorbed, entirely unaware of the conversation happening 2 feet away. She looked at Roman. I'll find a better daycare, she said. Myself. I'll look into options and I'll choose one and I'll tell you which one it is. You don't pick it, you don't make calls, you don't send anyone to look at it before I've decided. Okay. And Roman, she waited until she had his full attention. If you ever investigate something about my life or Ivy's life without telling me first, I will take her and I will move, and I will not leave a forwarding address. I don't care what resources you have. I've been invisible before. I know how to do it. She said it quietly. She meant every word of it. He could hear that she meant it. She saw it register. Understood, he said. They finished dinner. Ivy ate her pancakes, which arrived late with a small amount of theatrical ceremony from Bee. She showed Roman her drawing and explained at length that it was a horse with a special power, the nature of which kept evolving during the explanation. Roman listened with complete attention and asked 2 follow-up questions that Ivy clearly hadn't expected and that therefore delighted her enormously. Celine watched and ate her chicken and maintained the careful equilibrium she'd been maintaining for 2 weeks and felt it becoming more expensive by the hour. The late-night conversation started by accident. She was on the couch at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday with the bills spread across the coffee table, doing the math again. The particular monthly math that always required creativity and sometimes required what she privately called robbing Peter to pay Paul arithmetic, where you delayed one thing to cover another and rotated the delays in a cycle that worked until it didn't. She had a new daycare selected, a facility called Meadowbrook Learning Center, with a spotless inspection record and a waiting list she'd gotten onto 6 months ago and which had finally called with an opening. The copay after her assistance tier was $40 more per week than Dottie's, $40. She did the math 4 times. At 11:20, without fully deciding to, she picked up her phone and texted, "How do childcare subsidies work if someone wants to contribute without it affecting my assistance tier?" She sent it and immediately felt the specific foolishness of asking a crime lord about childcare finance at 11 p.m. His response came in under 2 minutes. "Call me." She did. "You're up late," she said. "I'm always up late." The background noise on his end was office sounds, papers, the low hum of something electronic. "Tell me the situation." She told him the situation, the numbers, the assistance tier, the $40 gap, the rotation system. She told him plainly because she was tired and there was no performance left in her at 11 p.m. and because she had looked at the numbers 4 times and they didn't change. He listened without interrupting, which was something she remembered about him. That he listened completely, without the half-listening of someone formulating their response. "There's a way to structure it that doesn't touch your assistance calculation," he said. "I'll set up a direct payment to the facility. It won't be visible as income on your end. Your tier stays the same." "I need to understand how that works." "It works like a third-party scholarship or a benefactor contribution. Facilities accept it all the time. Your lawyer can review it." "I don't have a lawyer." "You'll have one by tomorrow." "Roman, I know. You'll pick the lawyer, not me. I'll send you 3 names in the morning. You choose. You review the arrangement. If you don't like it, we don't do it. But this is a real option." She sat on the couch with the bills around her and looked at the ceiling and felt the particular vertigo of a person who has been doing something alone for so long that any form of help feels like an ambush. "You're very good at this," she said. "At what?" "Finding the door that doesn't feel like a door." A pause. Then, "I'm not trying to trap you." "I know." And she did know. That was the complicated part. "That doesn't mean it isn't happening. Tell me what to do differently." His voice was even. "Tell me where the line is and I'll stay behind it. The line keeps moving because you're good at finding the gaps in it. Because every gap is a real problem I can fix. The heat, the daycare, I know what you can fix." Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "I know exactly what you can fix, Roman, and that's the problem. You can look at my life and fix every broken thing in it, and it'll feel like being saved, and I will not be able to tell the difference between being helped and being—" She stopped. "Being what?" She pressed her free hand against her sternum. "Being absorbed. Being reorganized until I'm living in something you built without me having made any of the decisions that matter." The silence on the line stretched. She could hear him breathing. "I hear you," he said finally. Careful, deliberate. "I won't— Roman, you bought a penthouse. He stopped. 3 days ago. I ran into one of your men, the one named Torres, and he made a comment about the place on 68th and Lexington, and when I pressed him, he turned approximately 7 colors, and I looked it up, and there is a Viscari Holdings LLC property acquisition at that address from last week." She heard his exhale. "It's for Ivy," he said. "Not for you to move into, just an option. If she wanted her own room, if you bought a penthouse for a 4-year-old's bedroom." "I bought it because I needed to do something concrete. I was sitting with 4 years of—" His voice broke slightly at the seam, just slightly. "4 years of a kid I didn't know existed, and I couldn't do nothing." Celine sat very still. She'd expected many things from Roman: the suit, the empire, the controlled efficiency. She had not recalibrated for the grief. She hadn't given herself permission to consider it as real. But there it was, the unsteady edge in his voice, the thing that didn't fit the rest of the performance, and she had no good defense against it. "Roman," she said. Her voice was quieter now. "I know I can't buy 4 years back. I know that's not what this is." A pause. "I just needed her to have a room that was hers. That's all it was. That is a lot of money for that's all it was. I have a lot of money." He said it without inflection. "Money is the easy part." She sat with that for a moment, the bills around her on the coffee table, the $40 gap, the heating system that cut out on the coldest nights, and that she'd reported to the landlord 3 times without any result. The winter coat she'd bought Ivy a size too large, and somewhere on 68th and Lexington, a penthouse apartment with a room with no child in it yet. We're not moving in, she said. I'm not asking you to. But you want us to. What I want, he said, is for Ivy to be warm, and for you to stop doing math at 11 p.m. alone. His voice was careful, but the edges were showing. What I want is to undo everything I did 5 years ago, and I know I can't, and so I'm doing the only things I actually can do, and I'm clearly doing them wrong, and I don't know how to do them right. So tell me how to do this right. She looked at the bills. She looked at the dark window, the city lights beyond it, the snow that had started again at some point while they'd been talking. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what right looks like with you. I don't think I've ever known that. Okay, he said. Then we figure it out. They stayed on the call for another hour, not strategizing, not negotiating, just talking, the way they used to, in the truck, on the hood, under the neon lights. He told her things about the years he'd disappeared. Not all of it, not the worst of it, but enough. His uncle's death, the months of violence that followed, the understanding he'd arrived at that people near him developed a specific kind of vulnerability, and his response to that understanding, and how the response had cost him the one thing he hadn't wanted to lose. She didn't absolve him. He wasn't asking for absolution. She told him about Ivy's first year. The apartment that had been smaller than the current one. The 3 jobs she'd worked simultaneously in the first 6 months. The specific exhaustion of being a new mother alone at 19, which was a kind of exhaustion she didn't have words for, and which she'd never spoken about to anyone because there was no one to speak to about it. Roman was very quiet when she said that. She heard it in his breathing, the weight he was carrying it with. I'm sorry, he said. I know. She believed it. That was the complicated part. It doesn't fix anything. No. But I believe you, she said. For whatever that's worth. They got off the call near 1 a.m. Celine put the bills in their folder and turned off the kitchen light and stood at Ivy's door for a moment in the dark, watching her daughter sleep, the small chest rising and falling, the bear hat on the bedpost where Ivy always put it, insisting it needed to be visible to sleep soundly. She thought about Roman on 68th and Lexington, about the room that was Ivy's without Ivy knowing it existed, about the penthouse that was too large for one man and the apartment that was too small for 2 people, and the enormous, impractical space between them. She went to bed. She didn't sleep. The invitation arrived Thursday morning. An envelope, hand-delivered to Belladonna House before her shift, addressed in print rather than cursive, clean, direct, the way Roman did everything. Inside 2 cards. The first a printed card with gold-edged border, Hargrove Children's Foundation Benefit Gala. Saturday, 7 p.m. Meridian Tower, 42nd floor. The second card was handwritten. I have to attend this. I'd like you to come with me. I know what I'm asking. You can say no. R. She read both cards twice. Then she went to Marco and asked if she could have Saturday off. And Marco looked at her, and she stared back, and he looked away first and said yes. She texted Roman, Saturday. I need a dress. His response, I'll take care of it. Her response, I'll pick it myself. Give me a number. A pause. Then a number. Generous enough that she stopped on the sidewalk and looked at it for a long moment. Enough that she could pick something real without compromise. She spent Friday evening with Ivy and Mrs. Paulson and called her college friend Daria, who worked at a boutique and knew things, and Daria talked her through 3 options, and she ordered a black velvet dress online at 10 p.m. that would arrive the following afternoon. Saturday, she tried it on in the bathroom mirror. It was not the kind of dress she owned. She owned practical things, things that washed easily, things that lasted. This was a different category of object, a dress that expected something of the person wearing it, that functioned as a kind of declaration. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long time. She looked like a woman who had decided something. She wasn't sure what she'd decided, but there it was. The car came at 6:30. Ellis, quiet as always, who gave her a professional nod and opened the door without comment. Roman was inside, and the sight of him in a dark suit in the amber backseat light was something she had to absorb in a specific way. Gradually, in segments, the way you absorbed things that were too much to take in directly. He looked at her for a moment before saying anything. Don't, she said, getting in. Just tell me what tonight is. He told her during the drive. The Hargrove Foundation, legitimate, well-regarded children's services. The event, attended by 300 people, city figures, financial sector, several politicians. The reason he had to be there: business, alliances, the maintenance of a public face that kept certain investigations looking elsewhere. Who else will be there? She said. People who know what I am and pretend they don't. His voice was even. People who need something from me. People I need something from. The usual room. And me. You. He glanced at her. You're there because I wanted you there. That's the truth of it. And the other truth. He looked at her directly. Being seen with someone like you sends a specific message to specific people. Someone like me, she repeated. Someone who isn't part of the business. He paused. It suggests a different orientation. Men in my position take women to these events who are part of the architecture. You're outside it. It means something different. It means you're using me. It means I wanted you there, and the context has political dimensions I'm being honest about. His jaw was tight. I could have not told you. I'm telling you. She sat with that. Outside the window, Midtown scrolled past. The particular density of Manhattan at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, the lights and traffic and human mass of it. If I'd known what you were 5 years ago, she said, would you have told me then? A long pause. I didn't know what I was then, he said. Not completely. And now you do. Yes. She looked at the city going past. Then at least we're starting from something honest, she said. The car stopped at Meridian Tower. The lobby was already full of arriving guests, the movement of expensive clothing under chandelier light, the specific social performance of events like this one. Roman got out first and came around and opened her door himself, ahead of Ellis, and held out his hand. She looked at it for half a second. She took it. They walked in together. But the 42nd floor was exactly what she'd expected and nothing she'd prepared for. 300 people in a space designed to make 300 people feel like the most important collection of humans on Earth. Floor-to-ceiling windows with the city spread below like a map of everything that was possible. Crystal everywhere. The low orchestral murmur of people performing their best versions of themselves. Waiters circled with champagne that Celine took and held without drinking, because she wanted her thinking clear. Roman moved through the room like he owned it, not aggressively, but with the particular ease of someone who knew exactly how much space they were entitled to and never took more than that, which paradoxically was more intimidating than someone who crowded. People came to him. He received them. Brief, warm enough to function, the handshakes and nodded hellos of a man who was known. He introduced her simply. Celine, no last name, no context, and something about the simplicity of it made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. She was managing well, better than she'd expected. She'd grown up working rooms, not rooms like this, but rooms in the hospitality industry understanding was transferable, and she could hold a glass and make eye contact and say something functional when someone spoke to her. Then she saw the woman. She came from the left side of the room, tall, dark-haired, in a red dress that had clearly been chosen as a statement and wearing it the way people wore statements, intentionally, with full awareness of its effect. She moved toward Roman with the ease of familiarity, which registered in Celine's chest before her brain had time to analyze it. Roman, the woman's voice was low, precise, European accent, somewhere Slavic. She kissed his cheek. The gesture was proprietary in a very specific way. I didn't know you were bringing company. Mara, Roman said. His voice was neutral. Not cold, not warm. Neutral. This is Celine. Celine, Mara Voss. Celine looked at Mara Voss. Mara Voss looked at Celine with the particular assessment of a person who is determining a threat level and finding the exercise interesting. Celine, she extended her hand. How do you know Roman? Old friends, Celine said. How lovely. The smile was perfectly pleasant and entirely without warmth. Old friends can be so important. She looked at Roman. We should talk later. There are things to discuss. Later, Roman said. Mara moved away into the room. Celine watched her go. Ex? She said. Business, Roman said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Celine held her champagne glass and said nothing, and filed Maravos in the category of things she'd be thinking about at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday alone. The evening moved. She ate something small from a past tray, something with salmon that she didn't taste. She spoke to a city councilman's wife about early childhood education funding, which was actually a topic she knew something about, and the woman seemed surprised and then interested, and they had a conversation that lasted 12 minutes, and that Celine found unexpectedly grounding, like finding solid floor in an otherwise unsteady room. Roman came back to her side. He handed her a fresh glass. Sparkling water this time, without being asked, which meant he'd noticed she hadn't touched the champagne. She took it. "You're good at this?" he said, quiet, watching the room. "I've been a waitress for 3 years. Reading rooms is a survival skill." "It's more than that." She didn't respond to that. They stood together at the window with the city below them, and she let herself have 30 seconds of something that wasn't entirely wariness. The view, the height, the specific feeling of standing above everything familiar at a sufficient distance to see its shape. Then the gunshots started. They came from the direction of the main entrance. Not close, not yet, but close enough that they were unmistakably gunshots. And the first one froze the room for exactly 1 second, the collective human instinct to disbelieve. And then the second came, and the room broke. Screaming. Tables overturning, champagne glasses shattering on marble as people dove. The orchestra went silent mid-measure, and the silence it left was immediately filled with the sound of people who were afraid. Roman's arm was around her before the third shot, pulling her into his body, one hand on the back of her head. His other hand was somewhere she couldn't see. The lights in the ballroom, the beautiful amber lights, flickered once, and then the emergency lighting came on, white and hard and without atmosphere. And in that light she saw his face from 4 inches away, and it was a face she had never seen before, calm in the deepest possible way. The calm of a person whose training had completely overridden their emotional response, a face that was all function. "Stay behind me," he said. "Don't stop moving. Stay low." Around them, 3 men she recognized from his table at Belladonna materialized from different corners of the room. They'd been here the whole time. She hadn't registered them. And now they were moving with purpose. And Roman was moving her through the chaos with a hand at her back that was firm without being rough, directing without controlling. She stayed behind him. She stayed low. The room was smoke. Something had been deployed near the entrance. She could smell it. And there were people everywhere, ducked behind toppled tables, running toward the emergency exits, some just standing in apparent paralysis, while others screamed past them. She heard something happen somewhere behind her. A short, ugly sound she knew was violent in the way you know things that are outside your experience, instinctively, in the back of the skull. She didn't turn to look. Roman's hand at her back kept her moving. Then he stopped. They were near the south end of the ballroom, behind a toppled service table that his men had established as a position. Roman's body was between her and the open room. She was pressed against the wall with the cold marble against her bare shoulder blades, and the black velvet dress that she'd bought to wear to this, and the absurdity of that was so complete she almost laughed, would have laughed if her body hadn't been entirely occupied by the business of keeping her heart inside her chest. A man came around the left side of the table. He wasn't one of Roman's men. He was moving with the same controlled speed that Roman's men moved with, same dead focus expression, same orientation. Not panic, not a guest caught in a crossfire, but something with a direction, with a target. Roman stepped out from behind the table, and the man raised something, and Roman was faster. What happened in the next 12 seconds, Celine did not watch in any continuous way. She saw it in fragments, in peripheral flashes, the specific editing of traumatic perception. What she understood from the fragments was that Roman fought with an efficiency and a terrifying physicality that had nothing theatrical about it. It was not the choreographed violence of fiction. It was brutally functional, the application of someone's complete force toward a specific outcome in the fastest available time. The man went down. Roman turned back to her. He was breathing harder, a cut above his right cheekbone, not deep, already beginning to bead. He assessed her in one sweep, the same way he assessed threats, she realized, that same comprehensive scan. And when he confirmed she was undamaged, something shifted in his face. He crossed to her. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." Her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "Are you?" "No." He looked at the cut. "Not significantly." Around them, his men were moving with coordination, clearing, directing, communicating in clipped half-sentences that she could hear but not fully follow. Below them, somewhere down the 42 floors, sirens had started. Roman looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "There's somewhere I need to take you, somewhere safe. And I need to explain some things when we get there. Things I should have told you before tonight." "How bad?" she said. He held her gaze. "Bad enough that after you hear them," he said, "you'll want to leave." She looked at him in the white emergency lighting, with the screaming room and the sirens and the full weight of what had just happened pressing against her from all directions, and said, "Then tell me now, right now, Roman, before I walk out of this room with you, I need to know what I'm walking into." He looked at her, he took a breath, and he told her. He told her in pieces. Not because he was hiding anything, not anymore, not in that white emergency light with the sirens rising 42 floors below them and the taste of smoke still in the back of her throat. But because some things have a structural weight to them that requires sequencing, and Roman had spent enough time building things, the empire, the walls around himself, the careful architecture of a public face, to understand that you couldn't drop the whole structure at once without burying the person you were dropping it on. So he told her in pieces. Standing in the underground parking garage, they'd reached through a service stairwell while his men secured the exits above. The garage was cold and smelled like concrete and exhaust, and the particular metallic cold of a New York winter seeping through the foundation. Her dress was wrong for this place. Everything about the last 4 hours had been wrong for everything that came before it. He told her about his uncle, Carmine Viscari, who had run the Eastern distribution networks for 15 years before his death, which had not been natural, which had been a removal conducted by men who then expected Roman to be grateful and manageable. He told her about the 18 months following Carmine's death, the war for succession that had cost him 3 people he'd considered friends, and had ended with Roman holding a position he hadn't entirely sought, but which he'd been structurally incapable of refusing. He told her about the businesses, the restaurants, the shipping companies, the construction subsidiaries, legitimate operations that also functioned as infrastructure for things less legitimate. He told her about the Korvath Syndicate. That name was the hinge on which everything else turned. The Korvath organization operated out of Central Europe with significant American distribution, financial fraud, trafficking, the movement of persons and products across ports Roman's empire nominally controlled. For 3 years they had been trying to acquire those ports through negotiation. Roman had declined. The negotiation had become, in the past 8 months, something less civil. "The shooting tonight," she said. Her voice was flat. They were standing near the rear of the garage, 2 of his men visible at distance. "Korvath," he said, "or someone aligned with them. They were trying to kill you." "Yes." She looked at him. "This has happened before. Twice in the past year, not at a public event." His jaw worked. They escalated. Tonight was meant to send a message. What message? That there's no safe ground. He held her gaze. That anywhere I go, anyone near me... He stopped. She completed it. Anyone near you becomes a target. Yes. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Not to stop sound. She wasn't about to make any sound. But because there was something happening in her chest that needed containment while she thought. "And you knew this," she said, "before you came to Belladonna House, before the park, before dinner at the diner." "I knew the general climate," he said. "I didn't know they'd move on a public event." "That is not what I asked." His silence confirmed what his silence always confirmed, that she had asked the right question. "You brought yourself back into my life," she said, "knowing that contact with you carries this specific risk. You let Ivy know you... She stopped. The thing in her chest was changing quality, moving from fear toward something that ran hotter. "You held my daughter, Roman. In the park, in the snow, you held her hand, and she told you about the pigeon, and you were already..."
I thought I had more time before they escalated this far. That is not a defense. I know. That is not a defense, she said again, louder, and one of his men at the far end of the garage turned at the sound, and she looked at him until he turned back. Roman stood in front of her and took it. He didn't argue, didn't reach for the justifications that were technically available to him, that he hadn't known the timeline, that he'd had security in place, that no one had been hurt. He stood there and let her say what needed to be said, and absorbed it the way men absorb things when they know the impact is earned. "What happens now?" she said. Her voice had come back down. "I get you and Ivy somewhere safe. Tonight. Before morning." He said it without inflection, practical and immediate. "There are places, properties not connected to my name, secure, monitored. You stay there until this is resolved." "Until what is resolved?" "Until Korvath is no longer a functional organization." The statement hung in the cold garage air for a moment. "How do you resolve that?" He looked at her. She looked back. She was 23 years old in a black velvet dress in a parking garage at midnight, and she already knew the answer, and she needed to hear him say it anyway. "The way these things get resolved," he said. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, opened them. "Okay. Tell me about the safe house." "Tut." It was not a house. It was an apartment on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown, whose ownership ran through 4 shell companies to a name that had no connection to Roman Viscari in any documentation that existed in any system. 3 bedrooms. Security cameras on every floor, 2 of his men in the apartment adjacent. They picked up Ivy at 2:40 a.m. Celine had called Mrs. Paulson from the car, speaking in the careful voice she used when she needed to convey urgency without content. The voice she'd developed for situations that required the person on the other end to cooperate without understanding why. Mrs. Paulson, to her credit, had Ivy dressed, and at the door by the time they arrived, and had asked no questions beyond the one that mattered. "Is she safe?" "Yes," Celine had said. "She will be." Ivy was half asleep, confused in the blameless way of children pulled from their beds at hours that don't make sense. She saw Roman in the car and reached for him with the unself-conscious directness of a 4-year-old who had already decided he was trustworthy. And Roman took her and held her against his chest and looked at Celine over the top of her daughter's dark hair with an expression that was made of every complicated thing simultaneously. Celine looked away. She watched the city through the window until they arrived. She put Ivy to bed in the room that had been prepared. Sheets that were clean and tight-cornered, a lamp with a warm bulb, a stuffed bear on the pillow that was not Ivy's bear but was acceptable. Ivy asked 2 questions, both sleepy and not requiring real answers, and was unconscious before Celine had finished the second one. She came back to the main room. Roman was standing at the window. His jacket was off. The cut above his cheekbone had been cleaned. Someone had a kit in the car, and there was a thin stripe of dried blood at his collar. He turned when he heard her. "She's down," Celine said. "Good. What time do your people need decisions from you?" "Nothing until morning." He paused. "You should sleep." "I'm not going to sleep. I know." He looked at her. "Sit down, please." She sat because she was tired in a way that had moved past the kind of tired that kept you standing. She sat on the couch and took her heels off and set them beside her feet and rubbed one hand across her face. Roman came and sat in the chair across from her, not beside her, giving her the space and distance with the instinctive understanding that closeness right now was not what she needed. "Tell me about Mara Voss," she said. She'd been carrying that name since the ballroom. The red dress, the proprietary kiss, the specific quality of familiarity. There had been no moment in the chaos to address it, but it had been sitting in the back of her teeth like a seed since 10 o'clock, and she needed it out. Roman's expression didn't change. "That's what you want to talk about right now." Among other things, he leaned back, crossed one arm over his chest, rested his elbow on it, touched 2 fingers to his mouth briefly. The thinking posture, she remembered it. "Mara runs the Voss Financial Network. Based in Geneva, operates through here. We've had arrangements. Business, primarily. Primarily. There was a period," he said carefully. "It ended. It's been over for 18 months. Did she know that?" He paused.
She had a different understanding of how it ended than I did. Meaning, she thought it wasn't over and you thought it was. Something like that. Celine looked at him. Is she Korvath aligned? The question surprised him. She could see that it did, a fractional shift in the controlled expression. He sat forward. What makes you ask that? The way she looked at you when you came in. It wasn't the way a former partner looks at a current enemy. It was the way someone looks at a person they're managing a specific outcome around, like she already knew something about tonight. Celine held his gaze. Am I wrong? Roman was very still. We've had her looked at, he said. There was nothing definitive. But not nothing. Peripheral connections. Nothing that proved active cooperation. He stood, went to the window. If Mara had operational knowledge of tonight, then she knew when you walked in that room with me that the shooting was coming. Celine's voice was flat and cold, and she barely recognized it. She knew, and she stood there in her red dress and kissed your cheek. Roman put one hand against the window glass and stood with his back to her and breathed. I need to make a call, he said. Make it, Botak. She didn't sleep until 4:30 a.m. She lay on the bed in the second room with the door open so she could hear Ivy and stared at the ceiling and thought in the circular, grinding way you think when you're too tired for linear processing. She thought about the shooting, about the man Roman had put on the ground in 12 seconds with an economy of violence she had never seen outside of movies, and which had been, in its own terrible way, the most honest thing she'd ever witnessed him do. Not the suits, not the careful negotiations, not the structured honesty of the conversations they'd been having. That was what he actually was. She thought about whether knowing that changed anything. She thought about Ivy in the next room with the strange stuffed bear and the absolute trustfulness of her sleeping. She thought about Mara Voss in the red dress, and the thing Celine had seen in her eyes when she'd looked at Roman, which had not been love or rivalry or the complex residue of a finished affair. It had been something more like assessment, calculation, the thing you looked at when you were deciding whether an investment was performing as expected. She fell asleep with that thought unfinished and woke with it in the same place, suspended mid-sentence in her own brain, when her phone buzzed at 7:15. It wasn't Roman. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered without thinking, the reflex of someone who answered every call in case it was daycare, in case it was the building about the heat, in case it was anything that required immediate response. Ms. Arden. The voice was male, professional. Not threatening, which was somehow more unsettling than threatening would have been. My name is Agent David Reyes, Federal Task Force, Organized Crime Division. I apologize for the early hour. She sat up. I have your number because you were listed as a witness in last night's incident at Meridian Tower. I'd like to speak with you. About what, specifically? About Roman Viscari. A pause. And about what you know regarding his operations. Celine looked at the open door to the room where Ivy was sleeping. She listened for a moment. She could hear Ivy's breathing, still deep, still asleep. I don't know anything about his operations, she said. Ms. Arden, we know you've been in contact with him for approximately 3 weeks. We know he's had a vehicle assigned to you, that there's an accommodation arranged at this address, and that you were present with him at the Hargrove Gala last night during what we believe was a coordinated attack. A pause. We're not here to threaten you. We're concerned about your safety and your daughter's. Something went cold and precise in the center of her chest. How do you know about my daughter? She said. We've been investigating the Viscari network for 14 months. You and your daughter have come up in that investigation. The voice was careful, even. I'll be direct with you. What happened last night is going to escalate rapidly. The people behind the Meridian attack are not going to stop because they failed once, and the people who get close to Roman Viscari in the next several weeks are going to be caught in the middle of something that has no clean edges. She sat in silence for a moment. What do you want from me? She said. A conversation, that's all. Nothing you say has to go anywhere you don't want it to go. A pause. We can meet somewhere of your choosing. You can have a lawyer present. I just need you to understand the situation fully before you make decisions about how close to this you're willing to stay. I'll think about it, she said. Ms. Arden, I'll think about it. She kept her voice level. Don't call this number again. I'll contact you.
She hung up and sat in the unfamiliar room and pressed both hands flat against her knees and thought. Then she got up and went to the kitchen and made coffee from the supplies that had been stocked in the apartment. Whoever prepared these things for Roman was thorough. She'd give them that. And stood at the counter and drank half a cup and made a decision. She went and knocked on Roman's door. He answered immediately, which meant he hadn't slept either. He was still in the shirt from last night, untucked, no jacket. He looked at her face. "What happened?" he said. "Someone called me." She watched his expression. "Federal task force, organized crime. He knew my name, this address, Ivy." She paused. He knew about Ivy. Something moved across Roman's face in rapid sequence. First threat assessment, then something harder, then something controlled again. He stepped back from the door. "Come in." She came in. He closed the door. "Reyes," he said. "You know him." "I know the task force." He picked up his phone from the bed and typed something into it. "They've been operational for over a year. They don't have enough to move, but they've been building." He looked up. What did he say? She told him exactly, word for word. She had the kind of memory that anxiety sharpened rather than blurred, had always been that way, and she repeated the conversation back to him with the precision of a transcript. Roman listened without moving. When she finished, the silence in the room was the densest it had been since the parking garage. "He's right," Roman said. She looked at him. "About the escalation." He set the phone down. "This isn't going to de-escalate, not quickly." He looked at her directly. "Celine, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." "Say it." "I'm going to give you the option I should have given you the night at Belladonna." He held her gaze. "I can put you and Ivy somewhere, completely disconnected from me. New documentation, new city, enough money that you never have to work the 2-job rotation again. Ivy never knows any of this happened. You rebuild clean." He paused. "That is a real option, and it's on the table, and I'm not putting conditions on it." She looked at him for a long moment. "And the other option," she said, "you stay. You know everything. You make informed choices about what that means." "Those aren't equivalent options," she said. "No," he agreed. "They're not." She sat on the edge of the chair beside the window. The city outside was fully morning now, the gray-white sky of a December day, the city operating on its Saturday schedule, completely indifferent to everything that had happened the night before. She watched a water tower on a rooftop across the way. "Tell me about the federal investigation," she said. "Not the summary, all of it." He told her. 14 months of accumulated surveillance, financial forensics, witness statements from individuals who had been offered agreements. The task force had 3 specific targets: Roman, a man named Halcourt who ran the physical logistics, and a third individual whose name Roman gave her last, Donovan Reese. Donovan Reese. She processed the name for 3 seconds. "Who is Donovan Reese?" she said. "My second," Roman said. "He's been with the Viscari operation for 9 years. He runs the internal security division." He paused. "He's the man who has managed my personal protection for the past 3 years. The task force has him as a target." "Yes." "Have you asked him about it?" "Not directly." Roman's voice was careful. "I'm in the process of—" "Roman." She looked at him. "Who else knew that we would be at the Hargrove Gala last night?" The room went quiet in a different way. He looked at her. Something was happening behind his eyes. Something she recognized, the particular expression of a person who has just arrived at a conclusion they've been avoiding and can no longer find a route around. "Reese coordinated the security plan for last night," he said. His voice had gone flat. "He knew the arrival time, the table position, the entry route." "And Mara Voss," Celine said. "Did Reese know Mara Voss?" The silence that followed was total. Roman turned and walked to the window and stood there, both hands at his sides, looking at the city below. She could see the tension in his shoulders from across the room, the specific stillness of a man processing a betrayal that has just crystallized from suspicion into near certainty, and doing the processing without the benefit of any expression that could be read or used. 9 years, he said. Not to her, or to her, but not needing a response.
I'm sorry, she said. He turned around. His face had resolved into something she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled performance, not the unguarded grief, but something beneath both of those. Something that was very, very cold. Where's the agent's number? He said. I don't have it. He called from a number that wasn't registered. He'll call back. Roman looked at her. When he does, tell him you want to meet. Tell him you have information. Don't tell him what information. She looked at him. You want me to meet with federal agents? I want you to be in a room that isn't mine when this goes sideways. His voice was precise. Because it's going to go sideways, and I need you somewhere defensible. I'm not going to be your insurance policy. I'm not asking you to be. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her, eye level, close enough that she could see the cut above his cheekbone and the shadow under his eyes, and all the things that the suit and the controlled expression usually manage to obscure. I'm asking you to protect yourself and Ivy using every available option. That includes Reyes. That includes whatever the task force has. I'm not asking you to give them anything. I'm asking you to have a lifeline that doesn't run through me. She looked at him. The morning light from the window fell across his face in a way that was unforgiving, and she looked at him in it. Really looked. The way she hadn't allowed herself to look since Belladonna House, since the park, since the Ukrainian diner, and saw all of it simultaneously. The man she'd loved at 18, the man he'd become. The father Ivy had already decided she wanted. The dangerous thing at the center of a dangerous world that had its specific gravity and was pulling everything she'd carefully built toward its event horizon. Okay, she said. He held her gaze for another moment, then he stood. She stood too. They were standing very close, close enough that she could hear him breathing. The distance between them was the kind of distance that had a decision embedded in it about whether to reduce it or maintain it, and she was tired enough that her defenses were operating below their normal efficiency. Roman, she said. Don't, he said. She blinked. What? Don't say whatever you were going to say. His voice was low. Not right now. There are things happening and I need my head clear. And if you say something... He stopped. His jaw worked. Just not right now. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Again, different meaning. She went back to her room. Achadit. Reyes called back at 11:40 a.m. She stepped into the hallway outside the apartment to take it. Not because Roman would have stopped her, but because some conversations required walls between them. I'll meet with you, she said when Reyes answered. Today. Not in a federal building, a coffee shop. Somewhere public. That works. No hesitation, no negotiation. He'd expected her call. I'll send you an address. And Reyes. She kept her voice low. I want full immunity from anything that comes out of this conversation. Not for Roman. For me and my daughter. A pause. I'll need to confirm that with, you'll confirm it before we meet or we don't meet. She paused. You called me because you think I'm useful. I'm telling you the terms of useful. A longer pause. I'll have the paperwork drafted in 2 hours, Reyes said. She went back inside. Roman was in the main room with 2 men she didn't know, speaking in low, rapid sentences. He looked up when she came in. She held his gaze for a moment and then went to the kitchen and poured herself more coffee and said nothing, and he said nothing, and that was, for the moment, enough. Ivy woke at 12:15 and appeared in the kitchen doorway with the bear hat pulled over her sleep-wild hair and her feet bare on the floor, and announced that she was hungry and also that she wanted pancakes. Celine looked at her daughter in the kitchen doorway of a safe house apartment she'd never chosen in a dress she'd bought for a gala that had turned into a gunfight, and felt the specific grounding weight of a problem she could actually solve. We'll find pancakes, she said. The good kind, Ivy specified, with the circles. Blueberries. Yes. Ivy nodded gravely. The circles. Roman appeared from the main room. He looked at Ivy with the expression he got around her, the one that bypassed all the layers. Ivy saw him and her face did the thing it did with people she'd decided she liked. It opened completely. Roman, she said, are you having pancakes too? I don't know, he said. He glanced at Celine. Celine looked at the floor for a moment. then at Ivy, then, briefly, at Roman. 3 orders, she said. The coffee shop Reyes had selected was on 47th, a corner place with good sightlines and the kind of busy Saturday midday traffic that made private conversation easy. She left Ivy with Roman, a decision that cost her something to make, and that she made anyway because Ivy had asked, specifically and firmly, for Roman to stay with her, and Celine had watched her daughter take Roman's hand and pull him toward the window where she'd spotted a dog on the sidewalk below, and there had been no good argument against it. She got to the coffee shop first, selected a table by the window, ordered black coffee, sat. Reyes came in at 2:03. He was younger than she'd expected from his voice. Mid-30s, dark coat, the specific low-key presentation of someone whose job involved not being noticed. He sat across from her and set a folder on the table. Ms. Arden. He slid the folder to her. Signed and witnessed. You're protected. She opened it, read it. It was what he'd said it was. She closed it. Tell me what you need, she said. Tell me what you know about Donovan Reese. She kept her face neutral. Why Reese specifically? Because Reese is the one we can use. Reyes leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice below the coffee shop noise. We've had 19 months on Vescari, and he is meticulous. The financial structures are complex, the operational security is tight. We can build around the edges, but we can't get to the center. He paused. Reese is different. Reese has been feeding information to a third party, we believe Corvath aligned, for approximately 8 months. He's not loyal. He's calculating his exit strategy, and he miscalculated the timeline. How do you know this? Because last night's attack at the Hargrove Gala was coordinated using internal security schedules that only 3 people in the Vescari organization had access to: Roman Vescari, Donovan Reese, and a woman named Mara Voss. Celine's hands were flat on the table. Mara Voss, she said. Her voice didn't waver. Is Corvath connected? Mara Voss? Reyes said. Is Corvath? He let that sit for 1 second. She's not adjacent. She's not affiliated. Her legal name before she changed it in Geneva 11 years ago was Mara Corvath. She is the operational director of the family business, and she has been inside Roman Vescari's inner circle for 3 years. The coffee shop was warm. Celine was cold. He doesn't know, she said. We don't believe so, no. Reyes watched her. He trusted her. She had access to his financial structures, his security rotations, he paused, his personal relationships, including potentially information about you and your daughter. She kept breathing, kept her hands flat, kept her face doing its job. What do you need from me? She said. We need Reese. Reyes sat back. He's scared. He knows Corvath is burning the operation from the inside, and he knows when the fire gets close enough, he's the first thing that gets thrown in. We think if the right person approached him, someone he didn't know was connected to the task force, someone he had no reason to see as a threat, you want me to approach him. You're a woman with a 4-year-old child who has been in Roman Vescari's orbit for 3 weeks. You're the least threatening person in this entire landscape. Reyes looked at her steadily. You could ask Reese a question and he'd answer it. We need him to answer one specific question about a financial routing number, and we need it on record. She looked at him for a long time. Outside the window, the city moved through its Saturday in the indifferent way it always did. Cabs and pedestrians, and the organized chaos of 1 million people with no knowledge of any of this. If I do this, she said, I need something in return. Not for me. For Roman. Reyes frowned slightly. Ms. Arden, I know what you want from him, she said. I know the investigation. I know the shape of the offer that's on your side of the table. And I know that without cooperation you have circumstantial connections and financial forensics, but you don't have what you need to close it. She looked at him steadily. You need him to cooperate, and he will, if the terms are right. He'd face a negotiated outcome. With full cooperation, full financial disclosure, and testimony regarding the Corvath network. She kept her voice even. That is an enormous amount of value. Enough value that I think your superiors would consider significant concessions in exchange. Reyes sat very still. You've thought about this for longer than 3 hours, he said. I've been thinking about this since 2 a.m., she said. I had time. He looked at her for a moment, then he reached into his coat pocket and produced a second card, different from the first call, a number she could actually reach him on. I'll have a conversation with my supervisor, he said. She took the card. I'll be in touch before tomorrow morning, she said. She stood. She left 2 20s on the table for the coffee she'd barely drunk. And Reyes. He looked up at her. When this is over, when the cooperation is complete and the testimony is on record, I need Roman to be able to walk away from this. Not completely free of consequence, but functional, alive. She met his eyes. That's what I'm buying with whatever I'm about to do. Make sure your supervisor understands that. She walked out of the coffee shop and into the cold Saturday street and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her hand wrapped around the card in her coat pocket. She had just made a decision that she hadn't brought to Roman. She had just made a decision on behalf of a man who would not have made it for himself, about an empire he'd built from blood and loss and the specific grief of someone who had survived everything except his own conscience. She had made it because Ivy deserved a father who could be present without a security team. Because the alternative to this decision was a world in which Korvath burned everything from the inside and Roman went down in the wreckage not even knowing which direction the fire had come from. She started walking back toward the safe house. 3 blocks from the coffee shop, her phone buzzed. She looked at it expecting Reyes. It was a number she didn't recognize. No name, just a text. 4 words. We have the girl. The world stopped. Her vision went white at the edges, and then everything came back with a terrible, high-definition clarity. The street, the cold, the people walking past with no idea, the phone in her hand, the 4 words that rearranged every internal organ she possessed into positions they were not designed to occupy. She called Roman. He answered on the first ring. Before he could speak, she said, "Where's Ivy?" The silence on his end lasted 1 second. 1 second. She heard him move, heard the sound of the apartment. She was at the window. Torres. She heard his voice, distant from the phone. Torres. Where is she? Torres. And then further, a door, and then silence. The kind of silence that has only one meaning. Celine was already running. She ran 6 blocks. Not toward the safe house. Toward it, yes. But she was running the way people run when the body has taken over from the brain, when the reasoning apparatus has been temporarily decommissioned by something that runs older and deeper and faster than reason. Her heels were wrong for running, and she lost one on the 3rd block and kicked the other off without breaking stride and ran in bare feet on December sidewalk and felt nothing because the cold had no access to what was happening in the center of her chest. Roman met her at the building entrance. He was already outside when she came around the corner, coat on, phone in his hand, and the 2 men behind him, not Torres, different men, she didn't track their faces, were moving with the coordinated urgency of people who had been given a specific problem and were already computing solutions. Roman's face when he saw her was the coldest thing she'd ever seen on a human being. Not cold in the way of cruelty, cold in the way of a person who has removed everything that isn't functional because functionality is the only path to the outcome they need. He took her by both arms when she reached him. "Are you hurt?" he said. "I'm fine. What happened?" She was at the window. Torres turned his back for 40 seconds. He was answering a call. His jaw worked. "The building has a service access on the north side. They came up through it." 40 seconds, she said. "Yes." "Where is Torres?" "He's—" Roman looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. "He's being dealt with." She pulled away from his hands. "What does that mean?" "It means he's been separated from operational duties pending—" "Roman, don't use that language with me right now. Where is my daughter?" "I don't know yet." His voice was steady, and she hated it for being steady. "I'm working on it. I need you to come inside, and I need you to tell me everything Reyes said at the meeting. You knew about the meeting. I knew you went to meet him. I didn't follow you." He held her gaze. "I gave you the space to do what you needed to do. Now I need to know what was said." She went inside. The next 40 minutes happened at a pace that her memory would later compress into something non-linear. Not because she wasn't present, but because the mind does something specific under that level of sustained adrenaline, prioritizes and discards in real time, keeps only what matters. What mattered? She told Roman about Reyes, about Mara, about the name Mara Korvath, and what it meant, and the 11 years in Geneva, and the 3 years inside his operation, and the Hargrove Gala, and the internal security schedules and who had access to them. She watched him hear it. She watched it move through him the way extreme information moves through a person who has trained themselves not to move. In small external signals only, the slight increase in the rate of his breathing, the tension that moved through his hands and resolved in the flat of his palms pressed against the table, the particular stillness that preceded a decision rather than followed one. He turned to the men in the room and said a name. Mara. One of them was already on his phone. He turned back to Celine. "Reese," he said, where does he think you stand?" "He doesn't know about the meeting with Reyes." She looked at him. "Nobody does. Except you." "Good." He looked at her for a moment in the way he'd been looking at her since the building entrance, assessing, calculating, but with something underneath it that was neither of those things. "The text you received, do you still have it?" She held out her phone. He looked at the message. His face did something imperceptible. He handed the phone to the man nearest him without a word. The man took it and left the room. "They'll trace the originating cell tower," Roman said. "It'll give us a radius." He paused. "Celine." "Don't tell me to stay here," she said. "I'm not going to." She looked at him. "I'm going to tell you what I need from you," he said, "and I need you to decide whether you can do it." She held his gaze. "Tell me." "I need you to call Reese, not Reyes, Reese. Tell him you've been at the safe house with me and you overheard something. Tell him you think Roman is planning to move against him. Tell him you want to talk, privately." He paused. "It'll get him moving. And when he moves, he'll go somewhere. And where he goes will tell me something about where the Korvath people are running their operation." She processed this. "You want to use me as bait." "I want to use you as a variable he doesn't know is in play. That's different from bait." "How is it different?" "Because bait is passive. You'll be active. You'll be wired and you'll have 2 of my men within 40 seconds of wherever he wants to meet, and you'll be directing the conversation." He paused. "And because you're the only person in this situation that neither side has correctly assessed. Reyes thinks you're a civilian with useful proximity. Reese has no category for you at all." He held her gaze. "You're the only person nobody is playing." She thought about Ivy. She thought about the 4 words on her phone screen. She thought about 40 seconds at a window. "Give me Reese's number," she said. Reese wanted to meet in an hour. He'd been too quick to agree, which Roman told her meant one of 2 things. Either he was genuinely frightened enough to grab at any offered lifeline, or he was already in motion and her call had been factored into someone else's plan. Either way, movement was information. Either way, they'd use it. The location Reese proposed was a parking structure on 44th, 4 levels, open air on the top, the kind of brutalist municipal structure that was invisible because it looked like everything else. Roman didn't like it. He said so in 4 words, too many exit points. Then he said, "Take it anyway." While she changed into clothes that had been in the apartment, someone's clothes, she didn't ask whose, jeans and a sweater that were close enough to fitting, Roman stood in the doorway of the room and briefed her in the flat, specific way she was beginning to recognize as his operational voice. Not the private Roman, not the public Roman, the one that existed underneath both. He told her what to say and what not to say. He told her Reese would be scared and that scared people listened for threats before they listened for content. He told her to establish that she was also scared, which would not require performance, and to let Reese lead the direction of the conversation, to give him the experience of controlling it. He told her the one question she needed to ask, which was about a property. A specific address, 40 minutes outside the city, that had come up on a cell tower trace as a point of origin for a communication that had passed through Reese's phone 7 days ago. "Why that address?" she said. "Because 3 weeks ago I was going to do an acquisition through that property. It was presented to me as a shipping logistics operation, looking for investment." He paused. "Reese vetting the deal." Another pause, just slightly longer. "The deal fell through. The property came back up in our surveillance this week as a location with significant activity. Construction vehicles, generator installation, the kind of preparation you do for a short-term operational facility. She sat with that. They're holding her there, she said. It's the strongest current lead. His voice was careful. I don't want you to. Don't manage what I'm thinking right now, she said. I need to stay useful. I'll stay useful. He looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said. She was wired by a man who worked fast and didn't speak, and taped something to her ribs with the impersonal efficiency of a professional. She put the sweater back on and pressed her palm flat against her sternum, feeling the slight resistance of the device beneath. Roman handed her a phone, a different one from hers. Clean number. If Reese or anyone else asks, you called him from this. She took it. He looked at her for another moment, the moment before she walked out, the specific threshold of it. Celine. His voice was low. Don't, she said. What he was going to say, she couldn't carry it into that parking structure. Tell me when we have her back. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. Reese was already on the third level when she arrived. He was a compact man, shorter than she'd expected from the way Roman's men spoke about him, with the particular physical density of someone who'd been athletic once and had layered something harder over it with age. He was wearing a coat that was too light for the temperature, and he had the eyes of someone who hadn't slept in several days, darting, overfocused, burning with the specific anxiety of a person standing on a surface they've just realized is cracking. She walked toward him. His eyes went to her hands, her waist, the space behind her. You're alone, he said. Yes. She stopped 6 feet from him. The wind on the third level of an open parking structure in December was raw and undecorated. She let it move through her. You said come alone. How'd you get my number? Roman's phone. He left it on the counter. She held his gaze. I took the number before he came back. Reese looked at her for a long moment, assessing. She watched him doing it, watched him decide she was plausible, which she was, because everything she was saying was close enough to a version of events that it had the texture of truth. What did you hear? He said. Enough. She crossed her arms over her chest, the cold mostly, but Reese would read it as self-protection. He got a call this morning. Before everything with... She stopped. Let her voice go rough at the edges, which required no performance at all. Before Ivy was taken. He was on the phone for a long time, and I heard your name. Reese's jaw tightened. What did he say about me? He said you'd made a mistake, that you'd been sloppy about something and that it was going to create a problem. She paused. And then he said he'd handle it himself. The phrase landed exactly where she'd aimed it. Reese looked at the ground for a moment. His breathing had changed. She could see it in his shoulders, the slightly elevated rate of it. He was running calculations. She could almost see them. He said that? Reese said. Yes. This morning. Yes. He turned and walked to the edge of the level, looked out at the city for a moment, came back. The movement of a man burning off something he needed to burn off before he could speak. He's not going to handle it himself, Reese said. He was talking to himself as much as to her. I don't know what any of this is, she said. She let her voice go smaller. Not weak, but contracted, which was honest enough because there were things in the situation that were genuinely making her chest close down. I know enough to know I'm in the middle of something I wasn't built for. And I know that a man just told a federal agent this morning that he was in contact with... She stopped. With people who want Roman dead. Reese's head came up. She held his gaze. What federal agent? He said. Reyes, she said. Task force. He called me this morning. She kept her voice even. He knows about the internal security schedules for the Hargrove Gala. He knows about the routing through the Lattimore account. She paused. He knows about a property on Kessler Road. The name hit Reese like something physical. She watched his face do what faces do when the floor drops out from under them. A fractional total rearrangement. The skin around his eyes went tight. His lips parted slightly and then closed. His weight shifted backward a half step, the instinctive rebalancing of a person who has just received a blow they were not positioned to receive. Kessler Road. Roman had been right. The address was the right question.
How does Reyes know about Kessler Road? Reese said. His voice was different now, stripped down. The performance register had gone off. I don't know, she said, but he does. And he was very specific about it. She looked at him. What is at Kessler Road? Reese looked at her for a long time. She waited. Where's Roman right now? He said. I don't know. I left the safe house while he was on calls. Another long pause. Reese was making a decision. She could feel it the way you feel atmospheric pressure shifting, something in the quality of the air between them. Go back to the safe house, he said. Don't tell Roman you talked to me. What's at Kessler Road? She said again. Reese looked at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite warning. Some hybrid of both, the expression of a man who has been in a situation long enough to recognize when someone else has just stepped into it without full information. Nothing you want to know about, he said. He walked past her toward the stairwell. She didn't stop him. She stood at the edge of the parking level and waited until she heard his footsteps fade, and then counted to 10 slowly, and then turned and walked to the stairwell and said, to the wire beneath her sweater, in a voice barely above the wind, Kessler Road. Her earpiece, they'd fitted her with one, small, tucked, crackled. Roman's voice. I heard it, he said. Come back,
The next 2 hours were the most organized violence she'd ever witnessed. She watched it from the command position Roman had established in the safe house apartment, which was no longer functioning as a safe house, but as a forward coordination point. Maps on the table, physical maps, paper, because Roman's people didn't trust digital for this. The information was too specific and too time-critical. The property on Kessler Road, a former cold storage facility 40 minutes north of the city, accessed by a service road off the highway, surrounded by open ground on 3 sides and dense tree line on the 4th. 8 men that Roman called in over the span of 90 minutes, each arriving separately, each briefed separately, the briefings efficient and spare in the way that told her these conversations had happened before. Celine sat at the kitchen table and watched and processed and held herself together with both hands, internally, in the specific way she'd been holding herself together since 2:40 a.m., which was starting to cost more than she had. Roman moved through all of it, the calls, the map, the briefings, with the cold efficiency of someone who had been trained or had trained himself to function in exactly this mode. She watched him from across the room and thought about what Reyes had said about meticulous, and understood it now in a different register, not as a bureaucratic observation, but as a description of a specific kind of intelligence applied to terrible purposes. At 4:17 p.m., he came to her. He sat across from her at the kitchen table. The apartment was quieter now. Most of the men had filtered out in ones and twos, headed to their positions. 2 remained near the door, giving her and Roman the functional privacy of distance. Tell me what you need from me, she said. You're not coming. She looked at him. I need you here, he said. In contact with Reyes, the task force needs to be held at a specific distance, not absent, but not moving on the facility until I've been inside. If they hit it before I can, he stopped. I need Ivy out before anyone with a badge comes through those doors. She heard the logic of it, hated the logic of it, sat with it. How long? She said. I'm inside by 6. She's out by 6:30 if everything... He stopped. If everything goes right. Yes. She looked at the table, at the map, at the aerial image of the Kessler Road property, the cold storage facility, the building where her daughter was because a man trusted for 9 years had been building his exit strategy on the architecture of a 4-year-old's vulnerability. Where is Reese now? She said. Moving. His voice was flat. He called someone from his car after your meeting. We have the call. Encrypted. We're working on it. He's in motion. A pause. He's either running or repositioning. If he's repositioning, then he'll be at Kessler Road. Roman held her gaze. Which is why I need to be there first. She pressed both palms flat on the table, breathed, looked at the aerial image until the edges of the building were very clear in her mind. The service entrance, the loading dock, the tree line on the north side. The north tree line, she said,
Roman looked at her. "If I'm there," she said, "I'm not going through the primary entry with your men. I'll stay on the perimeter. Tree line." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you where I'll be." The silence lasted 5 full seconds. "If something goes wrong," he said.
"Then something goes wrong while I'm 40 feet from my daughter instead of 40 minutes away." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. The argument he was making to himself. The calculations. The point where the calculations ran out and the thing underneath them took over. "North tree line," he said. "You stay there until I signal. Ellis will be with you." She nodded. He started to stand. She reached across the table and put her hand on his. He went still. "Bring her out," she said. He looked at her hand on his for a moment, then at her face. "Yes," he said. The drive north took 38 minutes. She sat in the back of the car with Ellis and said nothing, and watched the city give way to the gray-brown middle distance of the outer boroughs, and then to the specific bleakness of industrial highway corridor in December. Chain-link fencing, bare trees, the occasional structure sitting too far from everything to be comfortable. She thought about Ivy, about the bear hat on the bedpost, about, "I know, Mama," spoken with the certainty of a child who had never had cause to doubt. She did not think about what the inside of the Kessler Road facility looked like. She had made that decision deliberately. She would not build that picture because the picture would not help her, and it would cost her something she could not afford to spend right now. Her phone showed a text from Reyes. "Task force is staged at Route 9 juncture. We have the location. Give me a window, Ms. Arden." She typed back, 90 minutes. "Do not move until I call." His response, "I'll hold them, 90 minutes. She put the phone in her pocket. The facility appeared through the trees at dusk. The light had gone flat and gray and low, the specific quality of winter light at 5 p.m. that made everything look like the beginning of something ominous. The structure was larger than the aerial image had suggested. 2 main buildings connected by a covered loading corridor. The original cold storage infrastructure still visible in the heavy insulated cladding of the walls. Floodlights on the exterior corners that were new. Roman's convoy pulled off the service road half a mile before the facility. She got out of the car and the cold hit her, raw and serious, the country cold that had nothing to soften it the way the city did, and she stood on the gravel shoulder and breathed it in and felt it clarify something. Roman was 20 feet away, speaking to the assembled men in a voice too low to carry. She watched him, the way he moved among them, the authority that wasn't performed, the economy of instruction. She watched them listen. She watched them reorient. He came to her last. He was in dark clothing now, no coat, jacket only, darker than his usual palette, the kind of thing you wore when you needed to not reflect light. He looked at her in the gray evening. 90 minutes to Reyes, she said. He nodded. Roman, she said it quietly. If Reese is in there. I know. What are you going to do? He looked at her steadily. What needs to be done? She held his gaze, didn't argue. There was no argument that operated in this space, in this light, 40 feet from a building where her daughter had been for 6 hours. Okay, she said. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he turned and moved, and the men went with him, and she went with Ellis to the tree line, threading through the frozen brush to the north position, and she crouched in the cold with the bare branches above her and the facility wall ahead, and she waited. At 5:53, the lights inside the facility changed. She was watching through a gap in the tree line. The north wall had 2 high windows, frosted glass, industrial, and for the first 50 minutes of the wait, they had glowed a steady flat white. At 5:53, the quality of the light shifted, something moving in front of a light source, multiple somethings, and then a sound she felt before she heard, something low and percussive that was not consistent with ordinary facility sounds. Ellis put a hand on her arm. She had not said she would stay. She looked at his hand on her arm and then at the facility wall. Miss Arden? She was moving before the sentence finished. Ellis was up immediately behind her, but she had the surprise of it and 6 hours of her daughter being inside that building, and she crossed the 40 feet of open ground to the north wall at a run, which was not the plan, which was not what she'd agreed to, but the agreement had been made before the lights changed and before the sound, and there was a door in the north wall, a service entrance. She'd looked at this in the aerial image 40 times in the last hour, and she hit it, and it was not locked, and she was inside. The inside of the facility was cold in a different way from the outside. The cold of a space that had spent years keeping things below certain temperatures and still carried that capacity in its walls. The corridor she was in ran north-south, concrete floor, overhead fluorescents, doors at intervals. She pressed against the wall and listened. Sounds, voices, male, more than two, from the east end of the corridor. Something that might have been movement, heavier, from a door 30 feet ahead on the right. And underneath both of those, a sound she knew, small, brief, barely audible. But she had been listening to that sound for 4 years in the small hours of mornings when she startled awake and checked, the way you checked, the way she always checked, and she knew the exact frequency and texture of it, the way you knew your own heartbeat. Ivy crying. She moved. The door on the right was secured with a standard locking bar. Not a padlock, not an electronic lock, a physical bar that required a key to remove but which was not keyed from the inside, meaning she had to find a voice from behind her, close. She turned. The man was coming from the south end of the corridor. He hadn't been there 30 seconds ago, had come from somewhere she hadn't tracked, and he was looking at her with the expression of a person who has encountered something that requires rapid reclassification. He was large. He had something in his right hand that she clocked in her peripheral vision and deliberately did not look at directly. She was out of moves. Except she looked past him, at the south corridor, and her face did something she did not entirely manufacture. "Roman," she said, loudly. The man turned. She moved the only way available to her. What happened in the next 30 seconds she processed in fragments again. The bar on the door had a hinge mechanism she'd noticed in the 2 seconds she'd had to look at it, and the hinge was on the outside, which was a security design error she'd registered and stored. And when she hit the door with her shoulder while reaching for the hinge mechanism simultaneously, something gave that shouldn't have, the bar unseating from its channel rather than her unseating it. And the door came open and she fell through it, and the man behind her was already turning back. And then Roman's voice, from somewhere ahead of her, inside the room. "Down!" She went down. The sound above her was the sound she'd heard in the Hargrove ballroom. Brief, functional, not theatrical. She stayed down for the 3 seconds it lasted and then looked up. The room was the size of a large storage unit. It had 2 overhead work lights, one functioning, one dark, a folding chair, a cot, small, the kind found in emergency shelters. Water bottles still sealed. A child's jacket she recognized, folded on the cot, red, slightly too big, bought a size ahead to extend the life of the purchase. And Ivy. Ivy was on the cot, pulled into the far corner, and she was looking at Celine with an expression that Celine would carry in her chest every day for the rest of her life. Fear first, the deep animal fear of a child who has been genuinely frightened, and then, in the space of a single breath, something that replaced it completely. "Mama." Celine crossed the room on her knees and had her daughter in her arms before she'd consciously decided to move and held her, her face in Ivy's hair, one hand covering the back of her daughter's head, her body making itself into the only available barrier between Ivy and everything outside of that room. Ivy was shaking. Celine was shaking. "I've got you," she said, into her hair, into the cold. "I've got you. I've got you." "Mama, I was scared." "I know, baby." Her voice broke on the word. She sealed it immediately. "I know. I've got you." Behind her, the door. Roman in the doorway, breathing hard. The cut on his cheekbone reopened and running a thin red line down his jaw. He looked at them on the cot, at Ivy, at Celine, at the specific arrangement of them, which was every calculation he'd ever made and every price he'd ever paid condensed into one small image. And his face did something she'd never seen it do. It broke. Not dramatically, not the dramatic collapse of film violence, just the controlled expression giving way at its foundations. Something underneath it that had been held under pressure for a very long time surfacing all at once, and his eyes going bright and wet, and his jaw setting against it, and failing. From somewhere in the facility, closer now, definitely closer. Sounds of movement. Men, multiple. His or theirs, she couldn't tell yet. Roman pulled himself back. One hard breath. Back. "We need to move," he said. "Can you walk?" Celine said to Ivy. "Yes." Small voice. Absolute. "Good girl. You hold my hand and you don't let go, okay?" "Okay." Roman came into the room and crouched in front of Ivy. He looked at her. She looked at him. And even here, even in this, the look she gave him was the one she always gave him, the one without reservation, the one that had decided he was safe, and Roman absorbed it with an expression that had no armor left in it at all. "Hey," he said. His voice was rough. "Hi, Roman," Ivy said. "I'm going to carry you, okay?" Ivy considered this. "Okay." He lifted her. She went against his chest and put her arms around his neck, and he held her with one arm and moved toward the door, and Celine was up and behind him and they were moving. The corridor was no longer empty. There were 3 men at the north end, not Romans, she could tell immediately from the way they stopped when they saw Roman rather than orienting to him, and the east corridor had sounds coming from it that meant the primary engagement, wherever it had been happening, was migrating. Roman turned south. The south corridor was 30 feet, then a turn, then the service entrance she'd come in through. A figure stepped out of the turn. Reese. He was holding a phone. He looked at Roman. He looked at Ivy in Roman's arms. He looked at Celine. His face was doing something complicated, the specific expression of a man whose calculations have produced an outcome he did not model for, who is now standing in the physical reality of that outcome and finding it different from the abstract. Roman stopped. They looked at each other. 9 years. Celine felt the weight of it in the air, the specific density of a betrayal that had a long history, that had been built slowly over years, that had cost more than either of them had fully calculated when it was still a calculation. "Roman," Reese started. "Don't," Roman said. "It wasn't supposed to." Reese's voice had something in it that might have been the beginning of an explanation or might have been the beginning of something else. She was leverage, that was all. She wasn't supposed to be. "She's 4 years old." Roman's voice was the flattest thing she'd ever heard in a human voice. "She's 4 years old. And she was in that room alone for 6 hours. And if you say another word before I decide what to do with you, I will make a decision that I can't take back." Reese looked at Ivy. Ivy, from Roman's shoulder, was looking back at Reese with the direct, comprehensive attention she brought to all unfamiliar things. Something moved through Reese's face. She couldn't name it. It was too complicated and too fast. He stepped aside. Roman moved past him without hesitation, without acknowledgement, carrying Ivy down the south corridor with Celine at his shoulder. Behind them, she heard Reese's footsteps. Not following, not running, just the sound of a man standing in the place he'd arrived at and doing whatever private accounting that required. The service door. Outside. Cold air. Dark sky with the first hard stars of the evening coming through, and the tree line ahead, and the sound of vehicles on the service road that she registered as Roman's before she could fully explain how she knew. Ivy lifted her head from Roman's shoulder. "We're outside," she announced. "Yeah," Roman said. His voice was rough. "Are we going home now?" Roman looked at Celine. Celine looked at her daughter's face, the bear hat still somehow on her head, crooked, the ears flattened from hours against the cot, her eyes wide and dark and entirely present, the specific resilience of a child who has been frightened and has decided that the worst part is over because the people she trusted have arrived. Those eyes. Those impossible dark eyes that she had been looking at for 4 years and refusing to fully name. From behind them, inside the facility, the sound of something that was final and irreversible, the sound of a situation reaching its last available outcome, and in its wake, a silence that meant only one thing. She looked at Roman. His face was still. The cold came in around them. Ivy said, "Roman, your face is bleeding." He looked at her. Something that was not quite a smile, but was the shape of one moved across his exhausted, cut, undone face. "I know," he said. "Does it hurt?" "Not right now," he said. and Celine pressed her fist against her mouth and looked at the sky and held herself together for 5 more seconds, which was all she needed, which was all it was going to take, because from the service road she could hear Ellis's car, and behind it, further, the sound of Rhea's task force vehicles beginning their approach. And she had 90 minutes to account for and approximately 6 phone calls to make, and a decision that was going to change the shape of everything. But right now, in this moment, in the dark and cold outside a burning facility, with her daughter in the arms of a man who had turned out to be exactly as dangerous as she'd known and exactly as present as she'd needed, Celine Arden breathed. In, out. The task force vehicles came up the service road in a line of 4. No sirens, just the sweep of headlights across the frozen ground, which was its own kind of announcement. Celine watched them come with Ivy still pressed against her chest, and Roman standing 2 feet to her left, and the Kessler Road facility burning quietly at their backs. The fire not dramatic, not cinematic, just the dull orange persistence of something that had been set and left to do its work. Reyes got out of the lead vehicle before it fully stopped. He looked at Roman first, then at Celine, then at Ivy, who had fallen into a half-doze against Celine's shoulder in the particular way children fell asleep after extreme experiences, completely, without negotiation, as though the body simply issued a directive that overrode everything else. "She's okay?" Reyes said. "She's okay," Celine said. Reyes looked at Roman for a long moment. Roman looked back, the 2 men taking the measure of each other across the frozen ground, the federal agent with 14 months of accumulated material and the man that material was about, standing in the light of burning evidence with a 4-year-old's bear hat visible over Celine's shoulder. "We need to talk," Reyes said. "I know," Roman said. "Tonight." "I know." Reyes looked at Celine. Something in his expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but a recalibration. "You held them 90 minutes. You said you needed a window." "I did." A pause. "Thank you." She didn't respond to that. She was looking at the facility, at the fire that was eating the building with the patient indifference of combustion, and at the men Roman's people were moving out of it, hands secured, heads down, the organized aftermath of something that had reached its conclusion. She was counting them without intending to. "Where is Mara Voss?" she said. Reyes looked at her, then at Roman. "We picked her up at JFK at 5:40. She was boarding a flight to Geneva." A pause. "She didn't make it to the gate." Celine processed that, looked at the fire, nodded once. "And Reese," she said. The silence this time was different. Reyes looked at Roman. Roman was looking at the facility. "Reese is inside," Roman said. His voice had no inflection. Reyes looked at him. Inside meaning he made a choice when I gave him one." Roman turned from the fire. His face was the controlled one, the deep-level controlled one, the one that operated below the others. He had options. He chose the one he chose. Reyes stood with that for a moment. The men behind him were fanning out with the careful efficiency of a task force that had been staged and waiting and was now being deployed. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the tree line, an animal moved. "I'm going to need a full debrief," Reyes said. "Tomorrow," Celine said. Both men looked at her. "Tomorrow," she said again. "She needs a doctor tonight, and she needs her own bed, and she needs to wake up somewhere she recognizes." She held Reyes' gaze. "You'll have everything you need. Tomorrow." Reyes looked at her for a long moment, then at Roman, then back. "Tomorrow morning," he said. 9 a.m. My office." He looked at Roman. "Both of you." "Both of us," Roman said. Reyes went to his people. Celine carried Ivy to Ellis's car, and Roman opened the door and she settled Ivy into the back seat, and Ivy stirred slightly and said, without opening her eyes, "Are we going home?" And Celine said, "Yes, baby, we're going home," and Ivy said okay and went back under. Roman got in on the other side of Ivy. Not the front seat, not beside Celine, beside Ivy, so that she was between them. The arrangement was instinctive, unspoken, the 2 of them orienting to her without discussion the way water found level. Ellis drove. Nobody spoke for a long time. At some point on the highway, Roman looked across Ivy's sleeping form at Celine. She was looking out the window at the black highway median, the white dashes of the lane markers strobing past. She could feel his gaze, but she didn't turn to meet it. Not yet. There were things she needed to carry in the correct order, and she was still working out what the correct order was. After a while, without turning from the window, she said, "When did you know about Mara?" He was quiet for a moment. "I had a suspicion before the gala, not a certainty." A pause. "Not enough certainty, but a suspicion." "Yes. And you took me anyway. I wanted her where I could see her. If she moved, I wanted to know she was moving." A long pause. "I miscalculated the timeline. I told you that." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true. It's true, and it's also a way of saying you made a choice with incomplete information, and I lived with the consequences of that choice." Her voice was level, not accusatory. She was stating it the way you stated things that needed to be on record, not for the sake of the argument, but for the sake of the foundation you'd need to build on afterward. Roman was quiet. "Yes," he said, finally. "That's also true." She turned from the window and looked at him across Ivy's sleeping face. He looked back. The city lights had started to appear along the highway corridor, the first signs of the outer boroughs, the familiar density of illumination that meant they were nearly home, and in that shifting light, Roman looked like something that had been through a process that removed everything extraneous and left only the structural. The cut on his cheekbone had dried to a dark line. His eyes were shadowed. He looked like a man who had been carrying something extremely heavy for a very long time and had just put it down and was now experiencing the particular ache of muscles that had been under continuous tension. "Tomorrow is going to be complicated," she said. "Yes. Whatever you agree to with Reyes, I need to know before you agree to it, not after." "Okay. I mean it, Roman. I know you mean it." He held her gaze. "I'll tell you everything before I tell him anything." She looked at him for another moment, then she turned back to the window. "The penthouse," she said, "on 68th. "Yes." "We're not moving in." "Okay. But Ivy can have the room." She paused. "For now, until things are settled, until I know what settled looks like." The silence that followed had a different quality from all the silences that had come before it. It was not the silence of tension or of things unsaid. It was the silence of two people arriving at the same place from different directions and finding it cautiously habitable. "Okay," he said. His voice was quiet. Ivy slept between them. Ellis drove. The city came back around the car like a tide coming in. The doctor came at 10:30 p.m. She was a compact woman in her 50s named Dr. Aisha Brennan, who arrived with a bag and no questions about the circumstances and examined Ivy with the careful thoroughness of someone who understood that the examination needed to be comprehensive but also needed to feel, to the child, like something ordinary. She had the specific gift of talking to Ivy while examining her, maintaining a running conversation about Ivy's opinions on various animals, a conversation Ivy engaged with fully and at length, so that the clinical was camouflaged in the social, and by the time Dr. Brennan had completed her assessment, Ivy had apparently never been afraid. "She's physically fine," Brennan told Celine in the hallway. "No signs of physical harm. She's going to need some time. She may have some disrupted sleep, some anxiety spikes, some regression behavior. It'll pass. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for and less resilient than we hope, in equal measure." She paused. "How are you?" "I'm functional," Celine said. "That's not what I asked. It's what I have right now." Brennan looked at her for a moment with the particular assessment of a woman who had been doing this long enough to know what functional meant as a coping strategy and to respect it as a triage measure while noting it as something to revisit. "Call me if she has nightmares that persist past the first week," she said, "and call me if you stop being functional before you get to the part where you're actually okay." Celine looked at her. "Do you give all your patients this advice?" "Only the ones who are holding it together with the specific kind of grip that leaves marks." Brennan picked up her bag. "You did something extraordinary tonight. Allow yourself to know that at some point." She left. Celine stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went back to Ivy's room and sat on the edge of the cot that Ivy had claimed. Not the one from the facility, never that one, but the one in what would become her room, and watched her daughter sleep with the bear hat on the bedpost and the stuffed rabbit under one arm and the absolute trustfulness of a child who had decided that the worst part was over. Roman appeared in the doorway. He didn't come in. He stood at the threshold, because it was Ivy's space, she understood, and he was still learning the borders of spaces, still calibrating what he was entitled to occupy. She looked at him. He looked at Ivy. She told Dr. Brennan that a rabbit is her favorite animal, he said. She was very definitive about it. She's been definitive about it for 8 months. Celine watched Ivy breathe. She'll revise in about 6 weeks. She goes through phases. What was before the rabbit? Horses. Celine paused. Before that, frogs. Roman was quiet for a moment. Processing, she thought. Filing. Building the archive of a child's history he'd been absent for and was now trying to reconstruct from the available material. I missed a lot, he said. You missed everything, she said. Not as an attack, just as the truth, stated clean. But she's 4. She has a long way to go. There's a lot left to be present for. He held very still in the doorway. Is that... He stopped, started again. Are you saying that because... I'm saying it because it's true and you need to hear it before tomorrow when everything gets complicated. She looked at him. You're her father. That doesn't get negotiated in a federal debrief. Whatever happens with Reyes, whatever restructuring comes out of the next 6 months, that part is not on the table. Roman looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. His voice had the quality it got when he was holding something in carefully. Okay. She turned back to Ivy. Go get your face looked at properly, she said. Dr. Brennan left a kit in the bathroom. I'm fine. You have a 4-inch reopened cut on your face. Go. A beat. Then she heard him move away from the doorway, down the hall. She listened to his footsteps recede and then sat in the quiet of Ivy's room with the city's ambient light coming through the curtains and her daughter's breathing for company. And finally, in the privacy of this room with this small sleeping person, she let herself shake. Not crying. Not yet. That would come later, in the shower, in 2 weeks, in the middle of the night, at unexpected moments for the next several months while everything processed at its own pace. Right now, just shaking, the body's accumulated response to the last 18 hours releasing in the only way available, and she sat with her hands between her knees and let it move through her, and then she breathed and it stopped, and she was okay. She sat with Ivy until the shaking was fully done. Then she went to find Roman. Boy, he was in the kitchen. He had cleaned the cut. It had been properly closed now, steri strips, which he'd applied himself with the neat competence of someone who had closed his own wounds before. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and his coat off and his sleeves rolled to the forearm, and he looked like what he was. A man who had been through something and had come out the other side of it and was now sitting with the particular exhaustion that followed. She sat across from him. He looked at her. How long has she been asleep? He said. 20 minutes. She'll be out until morning. Celine folded her hands on the table. Tell me about Reese. All of it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he told her. Reese had been feeding operational intelligence to the Corvath network for 8 months. Entry points and exit points, security rotation schedules, financial routing information. Not for ideology, not for personal animosity. For money, and for what he'd believed was a guaranteed exit. A structure that would remove him from the Vescari operation cleanly, with enough resources to disappear. Mara had built it for him. She'd built it over 3 years, the relationship cultivated with the specific patience of someone playing a very long game. She was inside for 3 years, Celine said. Yes. She knew about me, about Ivy. The intelligence we've recovered suggests she knew about Ivy within 48 hours of my first meeting with you at Belladonna House. Roman's jaw worked. Reese had a contact watching the restaurant. Standard surveillance. I do it with my own people too, monitoring anyone I have extended meetings with. He reported back. Celine sat with that. So from the beginning, Mara knew that I had a daughter. He held her gaze. and that she was 4 years old, and that she went to a specific daycare on 40th Street. The kitchen was quiet. That's why you moved on the better daycare, Celine said. Partly. He paused. Partly, I genuinely wanted better heat. She looked at him. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the weight, the accumulated cost of the last 18 hours, something moved across her face that was not a smile, but was the space a smile might eventually occupy. You're a complicated person, she said. Yes. You're going to have to become less complicated. I know. He looked at the table. I'm working on what that looks like. It looks like telling me things before they become crises. She held his gaze. It looks like asking instead of arranging. It looks like... She stopped. It looks like whatever you were at that park in the snow when you crouched down to talk to her. That person. That's the one that works. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can be that person reliably, he said. Not yet. I'm being honest with you. I know you are. She looked at him. I'm not asking for reliable yet. I'm asking for the direction. He held her gaze. Something shifted in his expression, the controlled one giving way to the one underneath, the way it had been doing more and more, the way she'd been watching it do and trying to decide what to do about. Same direction we've been going, he said. Then we'll see where it ends up. They sat at the kitchen table for another hour, not talking much. The talking was done for tonight, and what remained was something that didn't require words. She made tea because there was tea in the kitchen and she needed something to do with her hands, and she made 2 cups without asking, and he drank the tea without commenting that he didn't usually drink tea, which she noted. At some point near midnight, he said, Thank you. She looked at him. For tonight. For Reyes. For... He stopped. For going into that building when I told you not to. You didn't tell me not to. You told me to stay at the tree line. Same instruction. Different framing. She held his gaze. You know why I went in? Yes. Then you know it wasn't for you. I know. A pause. But you came out with her, and that's... I know. She drank her tea. He drank his tea. Outside the window, the city did what the city did at midnight, which was everything simultaneously, indifferent and perpetual. Sleep, she said finally. I have calls to... They'll keep until morning. She stood. 6 hours. Then Reyes at 9. She looked at him. There's a room at the end of the hall. He looked at her for a moment. The offer, which was not an invitation, but was also not nothing. The specific calibrated distance of it, which was about safety and proximity, and the fact that tonight neither of them should be alone in a separate building. Okay, he said. She went to her room. She did not sleep for an hour. She lay in the dark and reviewed the events of the last 24 hours in the systematic way she reviewed things, looking for the points of failure and the points of improvisation and the places where luck had been the operative variable and the places where she had actually made good decisions under extreme conditions. There were more of the latter than she'd expected. She noted that and set it aside. At some point, she slept. The debrief with Reyes lasted 4 hours. It was conducted in a federal conference room with a table that seated 12 and currently seated 4. Reyes, a woman introduced as his supervising agent, whose name was Fitch, Roman, and Celine. The immunity documentation Celine had reviewed and signed. Roman had his own arrangement, negotiated in the hour before the meeting by a lawyer whose name she hadn't known 48 hours ago and whose competence was immediately apparent. The arrangement, by the time Fitch put her pen down, looked like this. Full financial disclosure of the Vescari Network's operations for the preceding 7 years. Complete testimony regarding the Corvath organization, its domestic operations, its personnel, its port access arrangements, its financial routing infrastructure. Testimony regarding 3 subsidiary operations that Reyes had been building cases on for 2 years and which Roman could close in a week. In exchange, a negotiated outcome for Roman that involved significant financial penalties, a supervised transition of business operations, and a period of structured cooperation that would last 18 months. No incarceration. Monitored but functional. Not clean. Not free. But alive and present, and on the right side of an equation that could have gone in a much more permanent direction. Fitch had looked at the terms and said, "This is generous." Reyes had said, "The intelligence value is significant." Fitch had looked at Celine. "Was this your framework?" "I identified the shape of a possible arrangement," Celine said. "Mr. Vescari made his own decision." Fitch had a long look on her face that Celine couldn't fully decode. She signed the documents. Roman signed his. In the hallway afterward, waiting for the elevator, Roman stood beside her and said nothing for a moment. Then, "The shape of a possible arrangement." "It's what I did," she said. "You negotiated a federal immunity deal and a cooperation agreement between two parties in approximately 17 hours while your daughter was missing. I had the quiet car ride to think about it." He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the professional assessment, not the unguarded grief, not the controlled performance. Something else. Something that was specifically about her, about what she was, about the things she'd done in the space between the safe house and the coffee shop and the service road, and what it meant about the kind of person she was, and what it meant about everything else. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. The elevator arrived. "Roman, He stopped, looked at her. "You terrify me." She held his gaze. "Good," she said. "Now you know how it feels." The elevator opened and they got in, and she looked at the closing doors and felt the specific, exhausted satisfaction of a person who has said exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, which happened rarely enough that it was worth noting. 3 weeks later, Mara Voss was formally charged. The name on the charging documents was Mara Korvath, the Geneva identity restored, the fiction of Voss stripped away along with everything else the investigation had been building for 14 months, and which now had the full weight of Roman's testimony behind it. Celine read about it in the legal summary Reyes sent to her email address. 3 paragraphs of procedural language that translated to the 3-year infiltration operation, the Hargrove Gala attack, the Kessler Road facility, the decision to use a 4-year-old child as leverage in a business dispute, all of it, on record, attributed, moving through a system that was slow and imperfect, and sometimes wrong, but which was, on this occasion, pointed in the right direction. She forwarded the summary to Roman without comment. He responded, "I saw it. Nothing else." She thought about what it cost to read those 3 paragraphs when you'd trusted the woman they were about for 3 years. When you'd believed she was something she wasn't. When the betrayal was woven through every operational decision you'd made in that period, retroactively contaminating things you couldn't now uncontaminate. She didn't push him to talk about it. He'd talk about it when he was ready. That was how Roman processed things, slowly, internally, in the deep where the machinery ran, and when the processing was complete, he came back to the surface with it resolved or at least contained. She'd known this about him since the parking lot of a gas station years ago. Some things didn't change. January came in cold and gray and relentless. Ivy started at Meadowbrook Learning Center on the 8th, in a classroom that had working heat, and a teacher named Ms. Ford, who had been doing early childhood education for 11 years, and who won Ivy's complete and permanent loyalty on the first day by possessing an actual rabbit in a cage in the corner of the room. "A real one," Ivy told Celine that evening, with the reverence of someone reporting a miracle. "His name is Percy, and he is very soft." "That's wonderful," Celine said. "I told him about my rabbit. The stuffed one. He was interested." "Was he?" "He looked at me." Ivy was very serious. "That means interested." Celine enrolled in the spring semester of the early childhood education program at the community college, the degree she'd started 3 years ago and deferred twice for reasons of practical necessity. The program was 4 semesters. She'd completed 2. 2 more, and she'd have something she'd been reaching toward for longer than she'd consciously admitted. The penthouse on 68th became, by increments, the apartment where they spent 3 nights a week. Not moving in, not restructuring, just 3 nights a week, because Ivy had decided her room there was the good room, a designation she applied with the same authority she brought to good swings and good pancakes, and because Roman was there, and because the heat worked without interruption, and because Celine was tired in the specific way of a person who has been managing alone for 4 years and has recently discovered that not managing alone was an option. She didn't announce this decision. She didn't frame it. She just started bringing 3 nights' worth of things on Tuesdays, and Roman said nothing about it except once, when she arrived on a Tuesday and found that he'd cleared a section of the closet without mentioning it, and she stood in front of the cleared closet for a moment and then hung her coat in it and said nothing, and he said nothing, and that was apparently how that went. The 18 months of structured cooperation with Reyes's task force began in February. Roman spent Tuesday and Thursday mornings in a federal building, providing testimony and documentation with the systematic completeness of a man who had decided that if he was going to do this, he was going to do it correctly, the way he did everything. Reyes called Celine once, in the 3rd week of February, to say that the cooperation was proceeding efficiently and that Roman's testimony was, in his estimation, the most comprehensive and precisely documented set of evidence the task force had received in 12 years of organized crime investigation. "He's thorough," Reyes said. "He's meticulous," Celine said. A pause. "You told me that." "You already knew it. It's why you wanted him." Reyes was quiet for a moment. "How are you?" "I'm finishing a semester," she said. "I'm fine." "The girl?" "She's in love with a rabbit named Percy." A pause. "She's fine." "Good." Another pause. "Ms. Arden, what you did in December, the arrangement you put together, the way you held the 90 minutes." He stopped. "I've been in this work for 14 years. I don't often say this, but you have a quality of mind that—" "Reyes." "Yes." "I'm a waitress finishing a college degree. Keep your compliments simple." He laughed, briefly, genuinely, the surprised laugh of a man who wasn't expecting it. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." "Do your job," she said. "Put Corvath away. That's the thank you I want." He did his job. Spring came late, the way spring always came late in New York, reluctantly, in fits, with cold setbacks that made you distrust the first warm days before the warmth finally committed. In April, Celine walked into an exam room at the college with the specific clean anxiety of someone who had studied sufficiently and was still afraid, and 3 hours later walked out with a grade she'd been working towards since October. She took a photograph of it with her phone and sent it to no one in particular, and then, after a moment, sent it to Roman. His response came in 90 seconds. "Come home. I'll make dinner." She looked at the text for a moment. Come home. She had not decided yet what to call the penthouse on 68th. It was the apartment. It was Roman's place. It was Ivy's good room. She had been careful, specifically and deliberately careful, not to let the word slip into usage, because she knew what words did. She knew they arrived before you were ready and established themselves, and then you were living in the reality they'd built, while you were still deciding whether you wanted to move in. But she put her phone in her pocket and walked to the subway and took it to the right stop and walked the 3 blocks and used the key she'd been given in February that she'd been putting on her keychain and taking off her keychain and putting back for 3 weeks before she left it on, and she rode up to the 14th floor and walked in. The apartment smelled like something being cooked. She couldn't immediately identify it, and Ivy was at the kitchen table with the particular aggressive focus she brought to coloring projects that mattered. And Roman was at the stove in a gray sweater with his back to her, and he turned when he heard her come in and said, "How'd it go?" And she said, "Good." And he said, "How good?" And she said, "Very good." And he turned back to the stove and said, "Good." And that was the whole conversation. Ivy said, "Mama, I'm drawing Percy. Can I see when you're done?" "Yes, but don't talk to me while I'm working." "Understood." She set her bag down. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Roman at the stove and Ivy at the table in the spring evening coming through the windows in the particular long gold of a day that had finally committed to warmth, and she breathed. She breathed the way she'd breathed in the dark outside the Kessler Road facility. In, out, deliberate, present. "Roman," she said. What are you making?" "Pasta." "Don't ask what kind." "Why not?" "Because I looked it up and I'm not confident yet and I don't want the commentary." She looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, the careful attention he was paying to the thing in the pan. The same meticulous focus applied to a weeknight dinner in a gray sweater that had been applied to 14 months of federal evidence. "It smells good," she said. A pause. "It's going to be fine." "I know." She went to the cabinet and got down 3 plates. "Ivy, wash your hands." "I'm not done." "You can finish after dinner." "But Percy might." "Percy will be there after dinner. Hands." Ivy made a sound of profound injustice and slid off her chair and went to the bathroom. Celine set the table. Roman brought the pasta to the table and served it with the particular focused attention of someone who understood this was a test he was conducting on himself. And she sat down and tasted it and said, "It's good." And he said, "I know." And she laughed. A real laugh, the kind that arrived without scheduling. He looked at her when she laughed, with the expression she'd been watching for 5 months build incrementally, the one that had no calculation in it, that was simply a man looking at a thing he was grateful existed in his life, and being unable to fully contain that fact. Ivy came back, hands wet from a perfunctory wash, and climbed into her chair and said, "What are we eating?" And Roman said, "Pasta." And Ivy said, "Which kind?" And Roman said, "The good kind." And Ivy said, "Okay," with the complete trust of a child who had decided a person was reliable and did not require further verification. They ate dinner. The formal cooperation period ended in August. Not with fanfare. There was no ceremony to the end of it, just a final meeting in the federal building and Reyes handing Roman a document that said the arrangement was complete and the terms fulfilled, and Roman signing it and Fitch signing it, and that being that. Reyes shook Roman's hand in the hallway, a brief, professional shake. Reyes was not a sentimental person in professional contexts, and Roman was not a sentimental person in any context, and so the shake was what it was, an acknowledgement, one professional to another, of a thing done. Then Reyes turned to Celine. He held out his hand. She shook it. "The Corvath prosecution is proceeding," he said. "Mara's trial starts in November. We'll need you for a brief deposition. You were a witness at the gala." "I know," she said. "I'll be there." "The rest of it." He paused. "The facility, the Kessler Road operation, the domestic network, that's all through. The task force is closing its Vescari file." He looked at Roman. "Officially, you're a legitimate business owner under supervised monitoring for the next 18 months. After that, the supervision ends." "I understand the terms," Roman said. "I know you do." Reyes looked at him for a moment. "For what it's worth, and I understand if it's worth nothing, what you did in there, the testimony, the documentation." He paused. "It cost something. I know it cost something." Roman looked at him steadily. "It cost what it cost." Reyes nodded. They left the federal building and stood on the August street, and the heat came off the sidewalk in waves, and the city moved around them in its indifferent, perpetual way. Roman stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the street. Celine stood beside him. After a while, he said, "It's done." "Yes," she said. "The Lattimore accounts, the port arrangements, the shipping subsidiaries." He was listing it the way you might list things you'd put in boxes when moving out of a place you'd lived for a long time, cataloging the absence. "All of it." "Yes." "I don't know what I am without it," he said. Not with fear, with the honest perplexity of someone asking a real question they don't yet have the answer to. She looked at him. "You're a man who makes pasta on weeknights and argues with a 4-year-old about how many bites of egg constitute a complete breakfast." She held his gaze. "Start there." He looked at her. Something moved across his face. The something that had been building since December, since the park, since the diner, since the garage at Kessler Road. The something that had been present in every conversation and every silence and every moment she'd looked at him from across a room or a table or a 4-year-old's sleeping body. "Celine," he said. "I know," she said. They stood on the August sidewalk. He reached out and she took his hand. She took it, the decision hers, the motion hers, deliberate, and held it. October. She finished the semester and enrolled in the next one. Roman hired 3 people to manage the legitimate business operations: a CFO, an operations director, and a compliance officer whose entire job was ensuring that every entity bearing the Viscari name remained on the correct side of every relevant line. He spent Tuesday and Thursday mornings in actual business meetings rather than federal debriefings, and the difference in him was subtle but visible, the particular quality of a man who is building something instead of defending something. Ivy turned 5 in October. The party was small: 6 children from Meadowbrook, Mrs. Paulson from 4B, who cried slightly when presented with her invitation, Dr. Brennan, who had become, in some organic and unplanned way, a presence in Celine's life in the category of person you trusted with the things that mattered. The apartment on 68th had not been formally named home yet. Celine was still working on the word, but it was where the party was, because it was where the space was, and because Ivy had asked specifically to have her birthday in her good room. Roman had asked what 5-year-olds wanted for birthdays. Celine had told him to ask Ivy. He had asked Ivy. Ivy had thought about it for 3 full minutes, with the seriousness of a person being consulted on a significant matter, and then said, "A rabbit, not a stuffed one." Roman had looked at Celine. Celine had looked at Roman. "We'll discuss it," she said. They discussed it at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday in the kitchen with the lights low and the city outside and 2 cups of tea neither of them had touched. And the discussion lasted 40 minutes and ended in the specific way that discussions about a 5-year-old's passionate and sustained request for a living animal tended to end when one of the 2 adults in the conversation was constitutionally incapable of refusing the child anything she'd sustained interest in for longer than a month. Percy II arrived on Ivy's birthday in a cage with a bow on it and a small card in Roman's handwriting that said, "From Percy the First's friend. Be good to him." Ivy sat in front of the cage for 15 minutes before she opened it. Then she opened it and held Percy II with the careful reverence of someone who understood the weight of the responsibility, and looked at Roman and said, "Thank you." Roman, sitting on the floor with 5-year-old guests in various states of chaos around him, said, "Take care of him." "I will," Ivy said. "I know," he said. November came. The Corvath prosecution opened in a federal courtroom downtown, and Selene gave her deposition in a room that smelled like old carpet and institutional air and spoke for 2 hours about a gala and a ballroom and what she'd seen and heard, and came out into the November afternoon and stood on the courthouse steps and breathed the cold air and felt the particular lightness of having said a thing that needed to be said in a place where it would be recorded and used. Roman was waiting at the bottom of the steps, not in the car, not with men, not behind anything, just standing on the sidewalk in a coat, hands in his pockets, looking up at her with the expression she'd been watching build since December, and which had long since stopped being something she was deciding what to do about and had become simply part of the topography of her days. She came down the steps. He looked at her. "How was it?" "Fine." She stood in front of him. "They'll convict her." "I know. It'll take time. The appeals will take more time, but they'll convict her." "Yes." She looked at him. He looked at her. November traffic moved behind them, and the cold was real now, the first hard cold of the season that committed rather than suggested, and she could see her breath in the air between them. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay." She held his gaze. "I spent 5 years being angry at you. Not all the time. I didn't have the bandwidth for all the time, but underneath everything, in the places I didn't look at, I was angry." She paused. "I built everything I have from that. The discipline, the degree, the specific way I held myself together at 3 a.m. when Ivy was sick, and I was alone and there was no one to hand the weight to. I built it from the anger because the anger was fuel and I needed fuel." Roman stood very still. "And now I'm not angry anymore," she said. "Not because you've earned the absence of it, but because I'm tired of running on that particular fuel and I have other fuel now and I don't need it." She held his gaze. "I wanted you to know that it's gone. What's here instead is—" She stopped. "I'm still figuring out what's here instead." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know what's here instead," he said. His voice was low. "I know you do," she said. I just needed to say the other thing first. He reached up and put his hand against the side of her face, the cold of his hand and the warmth of it simultaneously. She held her ground and let herself be looked at the way he was looking at her, completely, without evasion, the way Roman looked at things he had decided to know fully. Celine, he said. Yes, she said. Not as an answer to a question, as a thing standing on its own, as an arrival. He kissed her in the November street outside the federal courthouse with his hand against her face and the cold around them and the traffic indifferent and perpetual, and she kissed him back without qualification, without the specific bracing she'd been maintaining for months, and felt something in her chest that had been sealed for 5 years and cracked in December and been cracking steadily ever since open fully, in the way of things that have been waiting long enough. December. 1 year from the night at Belladonna House. The city had snow again, the dirty, wind-driven kind that covered everything in gray and made the sidewalks into mirrors and drove sensible people inside. Celine watched it from the penthouse window in the apartment that she had, at some point in October, started calling home, the word having arrived in her vocabulary without announcement and installed itself with the permanence of a thing that had been waiting for permission. Ivy was asleep. Percy II was in his cage in Ivy's good room, doing whatever rabbits did at 10 p.m., which appeared to be primarily sitting. Roman came to stand beside her at the window. She felt him there before she heard him. The particular way the air changed near him, which she'd been noticing since Belladonna House, and which had, in the past year, gone from a threat assessment signal to something else entirely. He stood beside her and looked out at the snow-covered city with the expression he got when he wasn't managing anything and wasn't performing anything and was simply present. He reached into his jacket pocket. She turned to look at what he was doing. He held out a ring, small, not ostentatious, because he knew her, had spent a year learning the specific contours of what she was, and ostentatious was not any part of it. White gold, a single stone, the kind of clean precision that said more about who he'd become than anything elaborate could have. He held it between his fingers and looked at her. I'm not going to make a speech, he said. Good, she said. I'm going to say one thing and then I'm going to wait. Okay. He held her gaze. You rebuilt me. Not the way I was. I know that's not possible, and I know that's not what you were doing. But whatever I'm becoming, you're the reason the direction is right. He paused. That's all. She looked at him. At the man he had been and the man he was, and the distance between those two people that had been traveled not easily and not without cost, and not without the specific damage that honest living inflicts on people who are paying attention. At his hands, the ones that had been violent, and the ones that had made pasta and held Ivy in the rain outside a burning facility, and learned over 1 year of Wednesday mornings to pour tea without being asked. At his eyes, which were Ivy's eyes, which were the eyes that looked at her from across a table every morning and confirmed, with the absolute conviction of a 5-year-old who had decided who her people were and required no further evidence that this was home. She took the ring from his fingers. She put it on herself. Roman looked at her hand. That's not traditionally, he started. I know. She looked at him. I wanted to do it myself. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face. The smile that had been taking shape for a year, the one that hadn't fully arrived yet, assembling itself gradually from all the small, unguarded moments. It arrived now. Not large, not theatrical, just the real thing, which on Roman's face was devastating in its rarity. Okay, he said. She looked down at her hand, the ring on her finger. The city below, covered in snow that was the same snow that had been falling the night she'd walked into Belladonna House, with her coat soaked through and her fingers stiff and her life exactly the shape it had been for 5 years, before the shape changed. From Ivy's room, a small sound, not waking, just the small sounds children made in deep sleep. The adjustments of a body that was fully trusting and fully rested and fully home. The jazz was playing somewhere. She'd put it on earlier, the low quiet station she'd taken to keeping on in the evenings, and it was still running in the background the way good things ran in the background, present without demanding attention. Roman put his arm around her. She leaned into it. Outside, the snow fell on a city that knew nothing about any of this and would have been indifferent if it had. And below them, 5 years and 12 months from their first beginning, the lights of New York spread out in every direction into the dark. Every one of them, someone's life, someone's wreckage, someone's rebuilt thing, burning away in the cold with the specific stubbornness of a flame that has decided it intends to keep going. She looked at the lights. She breathed. She stayed.